Call this meeting, the District of Tofino regular council meeting for March 10th, 2015 to order at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock a.m. and ask first for a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
Move that.
Thank you. So moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. We have some minutes from the council meeting held February 24th.
Move adoption.
Thank you, Councillor McMaster, seconded by Councillor Blanchette. All question?
Just a comment on the minutes.
Yep.
We have the date for the town hall is March 5th, and I think it was meant to be 25th, just in the minutes. So
Okay, thank you very much. All right, any other discussions, questions? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. No business from the minutes. Just one announcement or update from me, and that is at our January 27th meeting, Council passed 2 resolutions regarding Highway 4. The first was with respect to the proposed work that the federal government will undertake this summer to resurface the highway in the park, and Council directed a letter to be written to the Federal Minister of Environment. I just want to let you know that that was sent on February 2nd. It was copied to First Nations, local governments, and our MP or MLA, and that other letters of support were then written by organizations like the Regional District and local business organizations and some of our neighboring communities. So that's excellent news. And then the second resolution that we passed that day was with respect to culverts on Highway 4 and the concern about the state of culverts on the approach to Tofino, that concern resulting from the road failure on Bryce Bay. So I just wanted to bring you up to date a little bit about that, and then we will be discussing this later on our agenda with a letter from the Central Westcoast Forest Society. But the culvert on Bryce Bay Road did not collapse. It was not, the road failure was not a result of a culvert collapse, even though it was a 70-year-old wood box culvert. It was because the culvert could no longer accommodate high rain events, high water flows, and so erosion had started to take place adjacent to the culvert in soft sediments, and so that was what resulted in the road failure. So we don't have that situation on our highway here. I've been in contact with the Ministry of Highways. We are meeting with them on March 17th, and as well as you see the letter from the Central Westcoast Forest Society, they are undertaking a culvert assessment for the ministry, and I think we'll learn much more in the weeks to come. So, progress made, and that's it. All right, so we're going to move into the delegation section of our agenda. We have 2 delegations today, and just as a reminder for both our delegations, you have up to 15 minutes to make your presentation, and then council will ask questions and have discussion for any amount of time that it wishes to afterwards. And our first one is Marcie DeWitt and Sharon Gregson, so come on up. Sharon. Marcie is with the Coastal Family Resource Coalition. She lives in Fluid, and Sharon is with the Child Care Advocates of BC. And welcome, and thank you for coming. Coalition of, thank you.
So thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing me to come and present to you today. I'm glad to see that we've got some children in the audience. It's very apropos for the presentation. So I'm going to talk to you today about a crisis that affects your community, neighbouring communities, affects communities across the island, and in fact across every community in British Columbia. And I have the opportunity to speak to many councils and school boards, and I know that this to be true. So together we can make affordable childcare a reality in British Columbia, and to move away from the crisis that families are experiencing now. And there is a concrete solution on the table. You'll have a package before you, a green booklet, which hopefully you'll get time to read at some point. And inside is a 9-page list of organizations that are supporting this plan, including local, municipal, district governments, school districts, many kinds of organizations representing now almost 2 million British Columbians. So I hope you'll be interested in this information. So most British Columbian mothers with young children are in the labour force. These are 2012 stats from Stats Canada. You can see that between 64 and 82% of mothers with young children are in the workforce, and yet we only have enough spaces, licensed childcare spaces. So licensing meaning some form of health and safety regulations are being upheld in family licensed care and group licensed care for 18% of children. And yet we see far more mothers than that are in the workforce, and so those other children are in unregulated care. Sadly, you might know that BC has the highest and second highest rate of child poverty in the country, and if you're the child of a single parent, you're 50% likely to be living in poverty. And in fact, your school district has a 30% vulnerability rate, which means children who show up at kindergarten not ready to learn, vulnerable on one of the 5 developmental domains, so language, cognitive understanding, physical development. The provincial average is about 32.5%, so you're doing quite well, except you have some pockets of in very severe vulnerability, looking at the graphs that UBC produces. So we know that not enough children have access to licensed care. Well, how much are people paying when they do get access? So you can see here the average BC fees in 2012. And just in brackets here, I've put some of the fees that people are paying in Vancouver, Victoria, Kelowna, some of the bigger urban areas. And while they're far higher than you're paying here, this is the provincial trend. Every year, fees get more and more expensive. And I looked online at your Tofino Children's Centre what the way the fees are for parents there. So they're $5.75 an hour. So that translates fairly closely to the provincial average. So a lot of money for working families to pay.
Just a question, is that per year, per month,
That's per month.
Okay.
That's per month. So for many women, they would be working just to pay for their childcare. So the plan we're suggesting integrates the best of what we know in the K-12 system. It's not a perfect system, K-12. As a former school board trustee myself, I know that education has lots of pitfalls, but it is far away a better system than we have now in childcare. Universal access, so it doesn't matter where you live or how much money your parents make, you're entitled to go to K-12. Childcare doesn't have that same kind of right. So you can see here, in the interest of time, I won't go through it all, but you can see that we want to take the best of what the K-12 system has to offer with the best of what the childcare system has to offer. So quickly to go through the highlights of the $10 a day plan. So we're calling on Victoria for a new piece of legislation that speaks to the rights of young children to access quality early childhood education on a voluntary basis and to respect the rights of First Nations to design and govern their own early years systems. Moving childcare out of the Child Protection Ministry it's in now and into the Ministry of Education, which is actually what 8 other provinces and territories have already done, and it's an international trend. So BC really needs to catch up to that. We need a new role with mandated funding for school boards. We need to expand the numbers of spaces in group and family licensed childcare to meet demand. We need to invest in early childhood educators, having them work in elementary schools in K-1 classes, and investing in strengthening the early childhood education workforce. And for some of you in your green booklets, I've put what we call fact sheet number 5, which is the reason why businesses across the province are supporting the plan. And on the flip side of that, you'll see a little quote from the council in Cranbrook, who has said that they're supporting this plan, and in fact they endorsed it, because they recognize they need to attract and retain young families in their community, and without childcare, they're not able to do that. So this is the Mayor of Vernon supporting $10 a day childcare plan. And just to give you a quick snapshot of where childcare has moved into a Ministry of Education, both in Canada and around the world, and here on Vancouver Island in the First Nations community. In Quebec, they have a $7 a day daycare plan. Again, it's not perfect, but it's leaps and bounds ahead of where we are in British Columbia at $7 a day. And the economists have been able to number crunch the results in Quebec. Their plan started in 1997. And after 12 years, the Quebec government and the government in Ottawa were actually recouping enough money from more women able to work and pay taxes that it covered the costs of their plan. More women working, you can see the increase to their GDP. So that's just the return to government, but for the entire economy, because childcare has a multiplier effect, when you create childcare spaces, there's jobs that go into creating those spaces, jobs to sustain them, and then people who use those childcare spaces have jobs. So it's called a multiplier effect, and it has a huge return to the economy overall, $2.54. Again, an economic interpretation, not a childcare advocacy interpretation. So benefits to the BC economy, this was done by our colleagues at UBC, Dr. Paul Kershaw. You can see more women able to work, government able to collect more tax from income tax and provincial sales tax when people are spending money in their local economy. business saving money and families certainly saving money. Lots of business support for this plan. This is what's changed over the last 20 years. Business now realizes that childcare is actually a bit of an economic stimulator. We've got the BC Business Council, we've got the Senior VP and Chief Economist for the TD Bank of Canada, and Kevin Campbell, a recent piece he's written about the benefits of childcare not belonging to the right or to the left, but in the 21st century. So, lots of benefits for children and youth. It isn't just about the economy. We know that for children who get a good start in life, particularly vulnerable children, they're far more likely to go on and be successful both in school, more likely to have better health outcomes over their life, and even more likely to own a home and graduate from post-secondary. So one of the last remaining arguments about childcare, people say, well, it'll be nice to have it, but we can't afford it. Well, in fact, the last BC budget just a couple of weeks ago shows that we can afford it. The BC government is predicting to end this fiscal year in a surplus situation, a bigger surplus than they had anticipated. They're also predicting a surplus for the next 3 budget years. If we take even a part of those surplus budgets and use part of the surplus, still leave some on the bottom line, we can actually afford to implement this plan. It's cheaper than twinning the Portman Bridge. So we've just last week released some polling results from Insights West, a very reputable polling company in BC. 87% of British Columbians know it costs more to have a child today than it did 40 years ago, and 74% are supporting the $10 a day childcare plan. By a margin of 3 to 1, BC residents prefer government funding of actual childcare services over small cash payments in the mail. And 3 in 5 residents would both consider voting for a political party that implemented the plan, and they believe that the plan is realistic. The list that you have in front of you represents now almost 2 million supporters. You can see the list there of municipal, regional, and district governments. Lots of ECE experts, 28 school districts, credit unions, boards of trade, chambers of commerce, childcare organizations, women's organizations, all the labor, big labor in the province is supporting it, big labor, small labor, public and private labor. This is the motion that we're asking you to pass and that others have passed. It says we endorse the $10 a day childcare plan. The plan has the potential to make a real difference for BC children, families and communities. We urge politicians to commit to the vision and work with communities to immediately begin its implementation. So fundamentally, this plan talks about lowering parent fees to a rate that's affordable, $10 a day. It talks about increasing the wages and training of early childhood educators, and it talks about expanding spaces so that more families have access. And that's my presentation. That's about as fast as I can do it. Last night it took about 2 hours, so here's the long version. So I know this is a very encapsulated overview, but I hope it's giving you enough information to know that this is very well thought out. $10 a day sounds like a great slogan, but beneath that slogan is well thought out public policy change that's being suggested, looking at other jurisdictions from what we can learn from them to make a made in BC model. And I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. I attended Sharon's presentation last night down in Ucluelet, and I can tell that this is an issue that's really important to Tofino, because the number of people from Tofino at that presentation far outnumbered the number of people from our sister town down the end of the road. So there's a lot of interest and a lot of support, and I really thank you for coming all this way to make the presentation in person to us at Tofino, and welcome questions from council. Councillor Bart, take it away.
Sorry, I just have to laugh. But anyway, I the other day I just caught what I thought was the Premier saying, what you've also stated here, that they looked at the numbers and the province could afford it. Did I hear that correctly? And are you getting some positive indications from the province and with the other municipalities, especially on Vancouver Island? Have there been any movement toward bringing it to Vancouver Island municipalities and therefore UBCM? Are you aware of that?
So we have lots of support from Vancouver Island municipalities and school districts. It's a bit of a hotbed of support actually. And the UBCM has consistently passed motions every year, particularly for the last 4 years, supporting this kind of investment. And at UBCM last year, they specifically referenced support for this plan. So absolutely municipal governments and school districts are far closer to communities and are far very supportive of this plan. They recognize on the ground the difference it will make. The Premier said several years ago to us that the only thing holding government back from implementing the plan was that they couldn't afford it. So now we've been able in the last budget to show that actually they can afford it. And so now the Premier has said that they're being cautious about taking on any new big projects. We're trying now, our work is to help them understand that if they can take on big projects like redoing the Marcie tunnel and putting new bridges over the Fraser River, that they can take on building a childcare system. So we continue to make that argument, and our arguments grow stronger consistently with the numbers of supporters that we have, the non-traditional supporters we have. So ferry workers are supporting us, who you wouldn't think would be a childcare ally, boards of trade, chambers of commerce. So as voices for this plan grow louder, the provincial and federal politicians are paying closer attention.
Anyone else? Councillor Blanchard?
I think this is particularly important for Tofino because of our high cost of living. I think anecdotally I've heard that we're losing families like crazy. A lot of them are going down the road to Ucluelah for the cost of living. Cost of housing is much cheaper. But I think if we want to build this as a community, we really need to get behind this.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Blanchard?
I'll move we write a letter of endorsement.
Thank you. If I might rephrase that, would you be moving that the District of Tofino Council endorse the $10 a day childcare plan as presented by the Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC and the Early Childhood Educators of BC? I think that was your suggested resolution. Okay, is that all right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Second that.
Thank you. All right, so moved and seconded. Support for this plan. Any questions or final discussion? All right. Yes,
I'm
Councillor
just
Anderson.
wondering if you have any comment on that some federal parties also support a national child care plan, and how that might, how would that work out overall
Thank you, that's a
in
great
the
question.
long run, if that came about?
So absolutely, it's more likely that our provincial government will move to implement this plan if we have new federal dollars coming to the table. And so the federal NDP has put a plan on the table. Actually, they looked closely at our plan here before launching what they're calling childcare at not more than $15 a day across the country. And they're talking about dedicated transfer payments to provinces that would be earmarked specifically for the expansion of childcare. That would be helpful for our province to have new dollars on the table specifically earmarked for childcare.
Thanks.
Okay, any final discussion? Yes, Councillor Thick.
Yeah, I agree notionally with the concept. I have some personal things that I probably need to think about and work through as a mother who did choose to stay home and raise my kids in Tofino under the same difficulties that I think exist today. I guess my question really is, I'm okay with supporting the motion as it stands, but I wonder personally how realistic $10 a day is. That's my question. When we're struggling with the, how would this maybe compromise the people who are working in childcare? That the wages are so low here in Tofino that we cannot get people. And if we're saying, we want further assistance, could this compromise those who are working in childcare or early childhood education? Again, not to receive the full payment that they deserve for working with young children. That's a question I have. Like, how can we realistically do this when we can't even pay somebody? Is it $14? And we're having difficulty finding people at $14 an hour.
So thank you for that clarification. So that allows me an opportunity to explain a little bit more about, this is actually about raising the wages and benefits of early childhood educators. So lowering parent fees, but raising staff wages as well to an average of $25 an hour. So this plan is really predicated on the model that we use for elementary schools, where there's provincial funding that goes to an elementary school in order to create access for families and pay teachers a living wage. And so this plan actually, so there's a mechanism called the Child Care Operating Fund that child care providers receive now. It's minuscule. I was talking to a parent, a grandmother, I think last night, it's $3 a day per child. So if we start thinking about that transfer from the province, that payment actually being enough to lower parent fees and raise staff wages, it isn't about just lowering parent fees and leaving a gap that then the childcare provider has to make up. It's about fully funding the operations of the childcare, whether it's a family childcare or group childcare. So that's why smaller communities are very supportive of this plan, because it actually pays early childhood educators enough that they want to stay in the work. And it actually then allows them more spaces to open up. So there's a whole training component in this plan as well, through colleges and universities, to train and educate more ECEs, and they'll enter the field and stay in the field because they'll earn a decent wage.
Yeah, and I think because our average age is 34, this is a really timely concept that you're bringing forward, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bunton?
Yes, how does private private childcare fold into this plan?
So at the moment, all childcare in British Columbia is private. There is no publicly delivered childcare. Everybody's either a not-for-profit or a small owner-operator, or in the larger communities we're seeing the big commercial, big box chains that have franchises and are publicly traded on the Toronto Venture Stock Exchange. So this plan welcomes in all providers who want to be part of a new system. They can also opt out if they choose to, if they don't want the new public funding. But all operators, so whether it's a small owner-operator, whether it's a family childcare provider, whether it's the not-for-profit that's perhaps in a city space with no rent, all those operators are welcome in, would receive operating funds to be able to lower parent fees, raise staff wages, and be accountable for quality.
Thank you. Any final discussion? All right, I'll call the question on the motion then. All in favor? Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
So I would just like to share that when I told my colleagues I was coming here to present, every single one of them would have traded places with me in the party. Thank you for the opportunity.
Nice to hear. And good luck tonight in Euclid. I know that this is an issue for them, and I'm sure you'll see lots of good questions and support there as well.
As a child care
Thank you.
provider in the community, I thank you for supporting this. It's really, really, really important.
Thank you, everybody, for turning out. Okay, bye. Anyone who wants to slip out, it's totally okay to do so. Or
I can't stay.
you can stay and listen to our next delegation, another important topic. So we have Bobby Lax to speak about the future of adult recreation in Tofino. Thank you for coming, Bobby.
Thank you for Mayor and Council for the opportunity to speak, but less formal. I just want to thank Mayor Osborne for encouraging me to come out, and as well as Council McMaster and Council Barrett. I didn't speak to the other councillors about this, but I'm sure we'll have a dialogue just after. Basically, for the last 5 to 7 years, I'm not sure what the exact timeline on it. It's been very difficult during the winter to access sports in the hall. Years have started or have not started, and then come January we've been able to access. And for someone who's spent a good chunk of their winter here and who looks for something to do to stay active with our short days, it's been somewhat of a hardship. And when Council Blanchette in the last issue mentioned keeping young families here as someone who's 30 and who grew up playing sports, it's definitely something that's important to me. Mostly not just for the physical exercise, but one of the ways that I've found that I've made the closest relationships in our town has been through playing sports and getting out, and it's really not as much. Sometimes my partner April will say, just go take a run when I'm feeling anxious, and that just doesn't, it's never done it for me. It's about having the people together. And one of the the unique thing that I find about the gym is that I end up meeting people that I would have never spoken to or interact with from the various outlying communities in our town. And I think it's really important that we get that opportunity to play together. It's the time in our community that has knocks against it for being somewhat cliquey at times. It has been a way to break down barriers for me. And since, especially this year, I've noticed it as a new parent. You know, you wake up at 6:30, you're going until your kid's asleep at, you know, let's say 7, and then you want some physical exercise. And while it becomes dark very early around here, there's basically not really much of an option other than running on the path or biking. So it's been a great loss. And as someone who brought a partner here 2 years ago with a 5-year test for them, they gave me 5 years to make this place great for them. It's been a really hard one for her to meet people in the community, and two, to as a new mother, Annie just went to daycare, as a new mother to get that sort of after mothering exercise. And last year, our date night was always the Monday volleyball. It was a time for us to get time together. We had a babysitter. We are not people who are, you know, just want to go out for like a dinner or a beer to the bar. We're people who like to be active. So it's been a great loss. And, you know, just I know that this council deals with the issue of how to keep young families here. So there is a stack of priorities that come from housing and recreation and not having a high school here. And there's can be all these knocks against the community, and it's up to you guys to decide how that ends up being prioritized. But for me, and I was speaking to Andy Gregg, someone who's a great family within this community, it's been a huge loss to him because he imagines, you know, his kid coming out, watching him play basketball, potentially getting the sort of privilege that he has been bestowed with a scholarship, one of the best sports success stories from our community. So in approaching this, I guess it's been hard as someone watching a school that will always be underfunded. It'll always be having fundraisers, and a district that doesn't have its own gym assets. And I know I know there's been a ton of work from the district sitting down with SD70, and thank you for Mayor Osborne for your last Facebook post that described the situation, and it just seemed like we have to move forward from that renting the school. But I just wonder how long that will take and what that looks like in the long term to not have next winter to not have access to that school, because there aren't that many options for, as I've said, for the after school activities. And so, you know, we've been driving down to Yuki every once in a while to go play soccer down there at night, and that takes a toll. That's not time that well spent. Frequently it is raining a lot, so the options of the outdoor basketball or the outdoor tennis is not even this weekend with fog. You couldn't even play tennis here. Just praying for the sun to break through. So you wonder what sort of options there are and how the resources that were put towards the school, which I think is somewhere between the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 to rent the school. Is this a time to, not a time to ask a question?
I'll answer that.
Yeah, okay, great. To rent the school will be, can be in the short term put forward to create the same recreational opportunities for adults. And then within the long term, what that looks like when there's water, sewer, there's talk of a civic center, we already have a community hall, but it doesn't potentially fill the recreational needs of the community. And So I put that forward to council to discuss and to let, there hasn't always been the greatest communication from Parks and Rec via Wiccan School, community school, to the people who have always been waiting to find out about the gym. I sent a message to a friend who was coming, who I wanted to come to this meeting and help support, someone who I became friends with via council, and they said, Wednesday we're playing badminton at the school. I was under the impression that there was just about no access available, and as someone who's been part of the organizers of different user groups, having put in an application to be at the school, but have heard nothing back directly from either the school society or Parks and Rec about that, it leaves a little to be desired with this issue. So, thank you for hearing about one more young family keeping strategy, and I look forward to hearing.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us in person. What I really appreciate about that is that we all get to hear what you have to say, as well as the public and the press that are in the room as well. And you obviously speak for more than just yourself and your family, because this is a message I know that many of us as individuals have heard from quite a few people. So let me try to answer a couple of your questions, and then we can have some dialogue with council too. First of all, I agree with you that communication hasn't always been the best, and it's something that we've really been encouraging better communication between all of the different organizations that are involved in recreation, and I think we've come a long way. So I'm happy to say that. And we have representatives from council who sit on the Wiccan Community School Society, so I'm sure that they could help liaise a little bit there and just encourage good communication. The Wiccan Community School Society has taken up all of the available gym slots after school, and they are using those to program for youth and for adults, not specifically for adults alone, but for adults to support youth in recreation and education opportunities. So Sheena's definitely a good person to talk to about that and getting involved maybe in some of those activities. That all being said, you're right. We have one facility in this community. It's the school gym. The school gym is there for the school first and foremost. It's being used by the school and the school society. And I agree with you that this community lacks another appropriate indoor recreation facility. We paid $12,000 a year as a maintenance fee towards the school gym repair and maintenance that was split with Toolkit First Nations, and then we paid a little bit more to support a supervisor. So a small amount of Tofino's tax budget has been going to support that. Not enough to build a gym very quickly, but we have had, council had our first strategic planning meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the topic was definitely discussed, and it's going to come up. And then, like you said, you're right, it's a matter of choosing priorities. There's sewer treatment, there's discussion about a civic hub, there's discussion now about a indoor recreation facility, but that's what our job is to do, is to help make decisions about what the priorities are for the community, and to come back to the community to discuss what is this going to cost and how are we going to pay for it, and go from there. Thanks again. So, council, any questions or comments that you'd like to make or ask of Bobby? Councillor Thick?
Thanks, Bobby. I hear you loud and clear. And yeah, it's been an ongoing struggle as a family, as raising a family here over the last 25 years as it is today. And maybe it's there's just 2 points that I wanted to make. One is that one person can make a difference, and I'm really glad that you're here to speak to this, because I think you speak on behalf of a lot of people. I just recall the beginnings of the MUP, and this town wanted a multi-use path to allow kids safe access to the beach, and for the beach people to come into town. And we had a salmon supper about 24 years ago, and raised $3,000 and presented the $3,000 to the council of the day, and that began the fund for the multi-use path, which we all enjoy today. So it goes to show that, you know, the Rec Commission was really instrumental in that, and a very small group of people, including Andy Gregg's dad and myself, Sarah Timberlake and others, you know, saw that vision and just kept going towards it. So I think the same thing can happen with this, and I really, there's a couple of avenues, I think. In those days, we basically gave the money to the district, and then that money became leveraged and letters were written to the province, but basically this district has paid for that path, I would say, by and large. There's another vehicle that exists through the CBT where you can actually, through a one-time, you have an initial donation of $5,000, and it's a community fund, which is held in trust for a specific purpose. So that's another way forward. And I do think that there are ways to leverage small amounts of money, and I think we sometimes forget in this town just how, how one or two people can begin a whole revolution of making. I've thought about this, and I don't think we are really under the gun, and I think that we need an indoor facility. And I'm not sure where or how, but I do think that if you could put some energy into the Recreation Commission, if that, to make that a very strong priority, and this is a very timely conversation because we're about to go into budget. So I think between community will and council hearing this conversation today, we can combine our forces and begin at least an intention to walk down this path, and the money needs to start coming in, and we can work on ways to leverage that too. But I can't say the time frame, but I really appreciate you just putting this sort of near the top of the list for us.
Permission to ask another question?
Sure.
So in the short term, previous to building a facility, is there an option to allocate funds towards parks and recreation, or would there be an appetite to allocate funds towards parks and recreations to identify either someone who's trying to help coordinate adult sports within this community, or organizing one-time, I gave the example of like bocce ball tournaments or frisbee tournaments, or like ultimate games, or soccer being one of the easiest things, that $10,000 to $12,000 or any amount the council decided to try to make up in the meantime for that void in Parks and Rec. And to be honest, maybe it's just up to adults to organize themselves, because we are adults after all, but that doesn't leave without that sort of opportunity for a new family coming into town, or new person coming into town. There isn't that a really obvious place to go to join on to any sport.
Thank you for the idea. I don't know if we could give you a hard and fast answer today,
Oh,
but
it's more
you've
just-
come forth and given us the idea, and certainly we're all listening, so thank you. Councillor Blanchette, did you have
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a town that does not have a gym for young people to go, everybody to go, but in particular young men, is to play sports. Basketball is laying the groundwork for some future social problems. So I think this is very high on my priority list. I really appreciate you bringing up a point of the gym being a significant social mixer, where people who otherwise wouldn't mix, because we are, I agree with you, quite a siloed town, I call it. I think that's an excellent point, and should figure hard into our thinking. I like your idea of outdoor games. We do have some spaces here that I think are very underutilized, the tennis courts and the basketball courts for one. We can't always rely on the weather, but certainly when we do have decent weather, there could be, if somebody were to organize it, some impromptu basketball games, perhaps even a little bush league just to pull in the basketball players. And I have a question for staff, but I don't think staff is here. But I'm wondering what proportion of our time, of Parks and Rec time, does go into organizing adult sports? Any way we can get an answer to that?
Aaron? I don't know if Aaron will have a specific answer,
Yeah.
but I know it's part of the complement. If you look through the the flyers that are produced through
Yeah.
once a year, you'll see them, but I don't know if
I
Aaron
could,
can
I
answer.
could give you a proportion. I can tell you that most of our programming is directed towards children and youth.
Yeah.
Not to say that we don't have other types of education. The way that our system works is that people come forward with something they'd like to do in the community. Say we have our yoga instructors and they'd like to go to the Ilocos, and then we help them with registration and advertising. But it's always driven by the community rather than top down. That's how the system works.
Right, so maybe there's an opening there then for some community member to come forth and say, I want to help
Yeah.
organize a basketball tournament.
And then we assist with registration and some advertising in our brochures.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Great. I'm sorry, we don't take questions from the audience. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you've been saying, Bobby, and I think even before the demise with the school gym, we lacked in adult recreation, and I think probably quite rightly in the early days, people recognised there was a lack of facilities and things to do for kids, and that was the concentration. But now the pendulum has switched, and you know, playing sports is a great social leveler, and you know, maybe I should talk to you afterwards, because maybe the Legion could help out, because we get some money for sports and things, so give me a call.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Councillor Burt?
Thanks very much for coming, Bobby, that's great. This is kind of 2 in a row because we had a presentation from the Recreation Commission at our last meet, was at the COW meeting, and talking about a facility and explaining why, for example, just a redo of the community hall wouldn't actually address a lot of the issues because of ceiling heights and so forth. And they suggested that a model of a building very functional that was built in Port Alberni might be a way to go, and it had a relatively low price tag, and there are a bunch of other scenarios and so forth. What I'm concerned with is the kind of, I sense, especially with given our demographic and so forth, and granted, a lot of people, you know, are get a lot of satisfaction from surfing and other kinds of things that are available as activities. But I agree that that kind of social, structured social engagement opportunity, such as through sport games and so forth, is lacking for adults, and it does add to the quality of life. That we're needing a rethink on our recreation. Like, it needs to be like a community life. So we're capturing everybody, the youth, the children, adults, seniors, and so forth, but with some energy and rigor, and I really want to put my own energy behind kind of advocating and supporting for that. In the kind of short term, one of the things that comes to mind is, you know, various communities have dealt with things differently, and we're kind of, interestingly, at a place where we're seriously talking about the civic hub and center, which is exactly what we were talking about when that concept got thrown on, you know, by the wayside, and it's like, give them a hall where they can hoot and holler, and, you know, so we have this hall that kind of, they say is really booked and utilized it, but I'm not quite sure that it's actually fitting anybody's needs. It's just we've adapted to it. So, you know, there's a question about that space, the new sports complex kind of concept, civic hub, maybe, you know, so there's a lot going on. And I know when we really applied some rigor to investigating these options and kind of maybe beating the bushes a bit more for some new and creative thinking, and we just have done that with the events, creating an event strategy, that I think we're at a time where perhaps our rec commission, our council, our recreation department would benefit by, you know, working with somebody who has had that experience of helping really taking resources that are within the community and helping us see or plan to use them differently, or getting creative about ways to finance an undertaking like a community hall. You know, in Quadra Island, the community did it. you know, they did the fundraising, and they have something in their grocery store called the Spirit Program, and that was partly used to raise funds. And, you know, there's just avenues that I think this could be tackled, but as Councillor Fick said, you know, sometimes it needs a champion, and that can happen at the council level, it can happen in the community, and, you know, our rec commission have come forward pretty strongly, so encouraging, you know, as many people to dialogue in that area as possible and maybe get involved. But that you came forward and put our eyes on this, I think it's really important. We're doing the strategic plan, we're doing the budgeting. You know, it's a need, and we need to pay attention to it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bobby, for coming. One last comment from Councillor
Thanks
Anderson.
for
and then we'll
coming,
move on.
Bobby. Your words were heard loud and clear. And as has been said already, we've been looking at that in the strategic plan. But I think at the council level, our focus hasn't been as strongly there as it should be. And as much as we've supported and tried to keep the gym use going, it's time we refocused and sort of looked at the whole picture again. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. For correspondence for information only, we have a letter from the Central Westcoast Forest Society that provides a little bit of detail, as I alluded to earlier today, about the culverts on Highway 4 and the approach to Tofino. There are 13 culverts, and the list that they've included just tells us a little bit more about what they're constructed of and issues with fish passage, as well as a priority ranking for rehabilitation and in some cases perhaps replacement. For council's knowledge, this is a work in progress, and I know that the Central Westcoast Forest Society hasn't completed the assessment, and in fact I think they may have run up against a funding envelope issue with the ministry, and they need to get a little bit more money to complete the assessment, but it is on the list of things to do for the ministry to have this finished. And I don't know that I would be able to answer any of your specific questions, but we do have a meeting with the ministry on the 17th, so we can take more up with them then. But Councillor Fick?
Yeah, in response to the letter that was written, I think this is a really great, I'm just putting it out there for perhaps a potential perfect opportunity for Central West Coast to come as a delegation to the council, because earlier this year they asked if a representative would sit on their board. We said no, but we would like to hear from them. I think this is, you know, when the final report comes in, might we ask them to present a delegation to council with that final report? I for one would really appreciate that, because I think it, along the culvert assessment along Highway 4, now we have first-hand knowledge of really what's there, what's at stake.
Agreed. And I certainly can take care of that when it's done. Ask them to come.
So do I need to make a motion about that?
I don't think so. Councillor Blanchett?
I'm just wondering what triggered this assessment. Is it the repaving project that did it, or was it the collapse of the Grace Bay?
It was neither. This project had already begun before then, and I don't know who initiated it, whether CWFS approached the ministry or the ministry approached them. I'm not sure. I do know that I think the genesis of the project was more in the issues around fish barriers, and it's kind of gone from there into issues about the road as well.
Would these issues be developed during or addressed during the paving project?
No, not the proposed paving project in the park, because this is outside the park.
Oh, right.
So this is the section between the north boundary of the park and approaching Tofino through the what we call the hilly section.
And I note that there are at least half a dozen high priority rankings, and most of them are barriers, i.e. not fish friendly. So some work there to be done.
Yeah. And I think they'll be coming to us for letters of support and things like that too, as they undertake their funding applications. So we can push it from our perspective too. Okay, so maybe a motion to receive the correspondence?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Bart. Seconded by Councillor Anderson. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, any final discussion on that? Motion carried. All right. Under correspondence requiring action, we have a letter from Bobby Lax. Of course, he just spoke, so I don't think there's actually a specific request in the letter. But yes, Councillor Bart?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we should refer the letter to staff and to the rec commission.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay. So Councillor Bart moves to
Moves
refer the
to-
letter to staff and the
Yeah, second.
Tofino Recreation Commission, seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any final discussion on that? All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, our next letter is from the New West Coast Resort Association. This is a letter that the resort community has written to us concerning water rates, water and sewer rates. I'm going to do my best to describe how we got to today and then refer to staff for any mistakes that I make or technical details that I don't know. So last year, during 2014, staff identified some anomalies in water bills and went out and over a course of months replaced the water meters at resorts, most of the resorts, and as well identified some problems with water meter reading. So in the case of water meter reading, there were at least 2 meters that were being read 1 decimal point out. And so these resorts were being billed at 1/10 of what they should have been billed. In the case of the water meter replacement, the water meters were turbine meters with large volumes of water going through turbine meters. Eventually, the ability to read water accurately degrades. And when the water meters were replaced with new technology, mag meters, the consumption was more accurately being measured. And so in most cases, the consumption went up on the bill because it was more accurately being measured, although in a couple of cases, I think it might have gone down just a little bit. Because the Tofino bills, utility bills are, for water and sewer are based on the actual expenses of the utility. It's not a profit-making venture. What this means is that with the new higher bills that resorts are paying, it's resulted in what they're calling a windfall or extra revenue that's coming to the district that we would not have otherwise received if we hadn't changed the water meters out or found out about the mistake in the water meter reading. So what the resorts are asking, and this is a little bit in the letter, but also with a number of conversations I've had with the resorts and a meeting that we recently had with Nyla and our CAO, Bob, is that because we are in the process of reviewing water and sewer rates, and that sometime later in 2015, when we get the updated assessment from the consultant, we will be amending our water and sewer utility rate bylaws to better reflect the distribution, the proportion that different utility rate classes pay. But because that hasn't happened yet, they're paying the new bigger bills and are asking us for relief. It's not easy to give the relief because of the way it's structured in the bylaw, and the best way that it could be given, if council chose to do it, would be perhaps to take the Q1 rate and extend that into Q2, which means that the seasonal jump in rates wouldn't be charged for, and then ask staff to come back with a recommendation for rates in quarters 3 and 4, so that over the course of all of 2015, we cover the expenses of running our utility systems, but that the cash flow for the resorts is easier to manage. And I want to be clear that in all my conversations with the resort owners and managers, at no point has anyone ever said they don't want to pay or that they don't think they should pay. Everybody is prepared to pay their fair share, but that this is more of a question of cash flow over the year, as has been characterized to us, than it is of avoiding paying for water. That's not the case at all. All right. So that I don't know if that's clear as mud, or so my suggestion would be that we discuss this, and should council have the appetite to do so, I have discussed with staff a number of ways we could handle this with motions and what would be most expedient for staff. I recognize that changing rates in midstream like this is not the normal course of action. It's not something we like to do, but it is something that we're being asked to do, and in the interests of fairness, we can consider whether this is something that we're willing to consider. And I would also make clear that this is not something that would be applied to just the resort and hotel motel utility class, that this would be across all rate classes. So everybody would be treated the same way. Councillor Thick.
A question about the report for staff is the report was done by the West Coast Resort Association, as it says at the top. I mean, just want to check verify that the numbers being presented are correct in the report.
Okay, so there are a few discrepancies between their numbers and our numbers, but I will refer to Niall.
Thank you. To your worship, yeah, we have noticed a few.
I must say there's some astonishing numbers on that spreadsheet, 900% jumps. It's a tricky question because we're dealing here with some to quote Donald Rumsfeld, some known knowns and some known unknowns. We don't really know what the actual water consumption is because of where in the meters. We do know things like occupied room numbers and the actual cost per meter cube because we set those. So we're trying to do some math with some hard numbers and some soft numbers, and I found it very hard to make a whole lot of sense out of this thing. But I asked myself, you know, in terms of fairness, basically, it seems that the resorts have been getting a bit of a free ride for as long as this goes, for as long as this has been going on, and other people have been subsidizing the resort's use of water. So I know if I phoned up TELUS tomorrow and said, hey, I looked at the bill and you've been undercharging me for the last 2 or 3 years, how about you continue to undercharge me for the next couple of years? They're not gonna go for that. So part of me understands a 900% jump in the bill, and that is hard to factor into the cash flow. But part of me says, been getting a partial free ride for quite a while now. It's time to pony up and reflect what the actual usage is.
I think that no one is disputing paying that share. It's just a question more of flow, cash flow over the year. So like you noted, a jump of 900% is difficult for any business or a household if they found out that their water meter had been read a decimal out to undertake. And I don't, there's no right or wrong answer here. I mean, this is a tricky, and as you said, it's a complicated issue. Councillor Anderson?
I'm wondering if, are they asking that we do this for all accommodation? Like, there's a lot of motels and smaller accommodation. I'm talking about multiple ones, not B&Bs and stuff, but that are not part of this association, from what I understand, whose numbers aren't included in this. And I think just out of fairness, I wouldn't support micromanaging, in a sense, just these resorts.
No.
And that's the other question we have, is how much staff time would it take to separate these out, to manage these bills separately? And also, is it going outside of our own bylaws to do that? And we have to have new bylaws and new regulations just to do that. So I mean, it's a lot they're asking, in a sense, if some of my imaginings are correct.
Okay, so no, I would not propose that anybody be treated differently. Any decision council makes should come across all utility classes, whether you're a residential, hotel, motel, commercial, that if the rates, which would change by an amendment to the bylaw, so what we would consider is an amendment to two bylaws, the water rate bylaw and the sewer utility rate bylaw, that would change the rates for Q2, say, and that no individual businesses would receive special treatment. Therefore, staff time wouldn't be expended trying to tease that out. Nyla?
Thanks. I just have a few comments. Going back to Councillor Blanchette's comment about fairness and just ensuring that that everyone is paying their share. The idea of reducing or keeping the rates consistent for Q2, yes, it would lower the amount that the resorts and everybody would pay in Q2. But what we have the ability to do, and what we're in the process of doing, is amending the rate structure to a fairer rate structure. So what we're looking at is, we're looking at the distribution between the classes based on the draw on the system. So if a consumer is a heavier user of the system, it'll look at the cost of providing water service to that user and to all users and to all rate classes. So what we'll have in Q3, which we're aiming to have a new rate structure by Q3, and Q4 is a fair rate structure based on looking at the distribution between classes and the draw on the system. We don't currently have that. So if we collect a certain amount in Q1 and Q2 based on the current bylaw, and then amend the bylaw in Q3, the distribution between the classes is going to be fair. The charge will be fair for everybody, for all users. Yes, the residential class, and I picked the residential class because there are so many users in the residential class, have been subsidizing the other classes, or the hotel motel class in particular. So yeah, the rates would have been developed differently if we knew the actual consumption. So yes, that is true. But what we're trying to do is come up with a fairer system overall, and we will achieve that in Q3 and Q4. And I don't know if that alleviates some of your concerns, but I just wanted to clarify that. And if we keep the rates low in Q2 or keep them consistent to Q1, we will ensure that we still collect 100% of the revenue required to cover 100% of the costs. So there may be, if we bring forward a new bylaw with a new rate structure in Q3, there may be slightly different rates for Q3 and Q4 to ensure we collect 100% of the revenue. And then in 2016, the rates may be different going forward after that, so that we will account for an adjustment.
Thank you. Councillor Fick.
I feel hesitant in this decision because I feel that I have one side of the story in front of me, and I feel that I would like to understand the District of Tofino perspective more adequately before I was able to make this decision in the wisdom I feel like it needs to be made. So I would personally appreciate either a staff report or a short staff presentation for myself in order to make this decision.
Councillor Burke.
Thank you. So essentially, we have X number of dollars that needs to be collected for water use for a number of years until it was discovered that there was this problem. The hotels listed here paid about 1/10 of their actual cost.
Just two of them.
Two of them?
Yeah.
Okay. So if just two of them, why?
The others have had meters replaced. Their bills have gone up, but not as much as the ones whose meters were not being read accurately.
Anyway, the point is that I think it has come forward before that residents have suspected that they've been kind of subsidizing the water uses of the large resorts. And when I do the math, you know, your concern is about cash flow, but there's a couple things. One is that I think when the problem was discovered that the resorts were told that they were at about that level and have had a window of time to plan for the change, that the amount of money in the scheme of things that we're talking about relative, like when you think in this group, there's about $30 million of revenue that's coming in, you know, and I know there's costs and so forth, but we're talking about not huge amounts of money, but it is big for the residents, you know, who have to make up for that loss. So I'm not feeling too warm toward this right now, and you know, I'm just.
That's the purpose of this
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
Like I said before, there's no right or wrong answer, and it's a request that's been made, and at no point will the water rates and sewer utility rates ever be perfect. And we know, and Councillor Blanchette, I know you weren't with us when we had the presentation from our staff and from the consultant who's undertaking the review before, the questions of fairness and equitability across users and at different times of the year and with different rates as consumption increases are, they're difficult questions to grapple with, so. Yes,
Just
Councillor
for
Hart.
the question maybe to our Director of Finance, but oh shoot, I think I just lost it. I'm trying to answer it myself, so I'll come back to it.
Okay. Councillor Blanchette.
I wonder, has the option been looked at of approaching this in a different way? If it's a cash flow problem of just coming up with a kind of a payment scheme where they do pay the full rates for the water they're using, but instead of having it due on the actual water due date, there's a scheme provided so that they can spread those payments out. Has that been explored at all? Is it explorable even
Is it explorable even?
by the bylaw?
Nyla?
To your worship, it would require a bylaw amendment, and we'd have to apply it to everybody. In fairness, yeah, because the penalty. I mean, it's all relative. A bill to a resident at a few $100s is just as impactful as a bill to a resort at X amount. So, we have to apply it to everyone.
Did remember the question.
Okay,
It
go
was
ahead.
just more confirmation. There was a point where we had the levy, and that would have been a big concern in this because it would have been kind of being hit on two fronts. But this would not affect the way that we're charging now for no.
Councillor Blanchette.
I'm kind of concurring with Councillor Thick in that to feel good about making a decision here, I would need to hear a bit of a presentation from staff as to what the split is between resort use, residential use, and how much of that kind of subsidy effect is going on. If it's a matter of $10 per household, then I would say yes, let's do the resorts a favor here. If it's more than that, I think we need to take that into account.
Let me ask staff two questions then, maybe. First of all, could you give us some information about the timing of this? This is March 10th. The request is for Q2, which begins on April 1st, and we have one more council meeting. And the second question before then, and the second question then is, what would you see as, what would be part of a presentation that you could make to council that would help clarify some of the questions and discussion that you're hearing?
So in terms of timing, I see the request is for Q2 and Q3. And I was just briefly looking at this the other day, or actually just this morning, feels like a few days ago, about just looking at the comparison between what we collect in quarters 3 and 4, or 2 and 3, and what we collect in Q1 and 4. And we collect 75% of our revenues in Q3, or Q2 and Q3. So I wouldn't recommend lowering the rates for both Q2 and Q3, because everybody would be looking at a fairly big hit in Q4, all classes. So I wouldn't recommend that in terms of cash flow. That's probably not the wisest decision. As well, we're looking at amending or bringing forward new rates for consideration to council and recommending an amendment in Q3 anyhow. In terms of a presentation, yeah, there's information I could definitely provide to council and you know, provide a scenario of, you know, just what it would look like if we were to lower rates in Q2. I could also provide what Councillor Blanchette is requesting, which is the split between resort and residential and approximately how much it would impact each household. I could provide that information. And just going back to timing, I believe, Your Worship, you were asking about amendment to a bylaw for Q2. So would it be March 10th? The bills go out the third week of April at the latest. So there's definitely time to amend the bylaw to apply this to Q2. We may have to add a special meeting, but yeah, it would have to go over 2 meetings and we'd have to allow time for that. I think, does that answer both questions?
Yes. Just before I make a recommendation, then I'm just going to look to our CEO and ask if you have any comments you wish to make.
I think that as Ms. Atiana has said, we you know, this is something we do have the wherewithal to do, and the request is really from a cash flow perspective. As a utility, I mean, we can't use it as a profit center, so at the end of the year, for us as a district, everything is going to balance out. And what's being proposed is that it be applied equally to all classes. And really, this is until we get our act together. This happened through the district's fault. These were our meters that were not reading properly, and we're now trying to find a fair way to move forward. Perfect world, we'd have excellent data and we'd have new rates in place some months ago. It's a less than perfect world, and where we are right now is we are overcharging some customers, and they've come to us and said it's really causing a hardship for them in being able to run their resorts and provide service for the thousands of people that we're inviting into the community every summer. And I have to say I believe them. You know, having some of them live with these rates last summer, and found it quite difficult to offer the level of service that they wanted to offer. So I just want to put that perspective on it for council, that we're not going to end up sort of in a deficit position at the end of the year. We're not going to end up with a large surplus. There's a lot of math to be done as we prepare new rates, but we think that this is something that we can, what's being requested with the suggestion that it be applied to Q2. We think this is something that we can do and live with and move forward in a manner that we think is fair to everyone.
Thank you. So my recommendation is that we refer the correspondence to the next meeting, and that we ask staff to come back with a report or with a presentation on more of the technical information around our rate structure and for utility. Yes, Councillor Blanchette?
I would move that.
Okay.
But that it be a presentation so that we can ask questions rather than.
Yep, yes, okay. So Councillor Blanchette is moving then that we refer the correspondence to the next meeting and direct staff to make a presentation on our water and sewer utility rate, or water and sewer utilities, period. Seconded by Councillor Thick. Any discussion? Councillor Anderson.
I'm going to support it, but I'll have to say the timing of it is just terrible. We've got our staff tasked with doing the budget, plus they're already working on the rates and the new bylaws around us, and it's another spanner we're throwing in the works. So, but anyways.
I would hope that the presentation isn't that much staff work, because they know the system inside out. It's what decision we make at that next meeting that will also influence what the implications for staff workload are. So
I wouldn't support it had I not heard from our CEO.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
All right, final discussion, Councillor Bart?
Yeah, just I'll be glad to hear that again, because this concern, community residents and how their water is charged in terms of relative to commercial charges. I think more clarity is always good. So,
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll call the question then. All in favor? Thank you, motion is carried. Great. Next is some correspondence from WildSafe BC requesting financial support from the District of Tofino. WildSafe BC is the program that currently employs John Platinius, and he does outreach and education around large carnivore interactions with people and our garbage, etc. Last year, we provided a very small amount of support for them. This year, they are asking for $500 of support as well. And we can make that decision. I just want to also remind council that most nonprofits are going through our granting process, and that it is not too late for this nonprofit to apply through our granting process as well. Councillor Tipp?
Yeah, I would recommend that we refer this to the council grant process.
I'll second that.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded to refer the request to the council grant process. Is there any discussion? Okay, I'll call the question, then all in favor? Thank you, motion carried. Great, moving into reports. First of all, the Tofino Ucluelet Automatic Mutual Aid Agreement. A report from the fire chief. Happy to see this, thank you very much, chief. And our first opportunity, I think, for our fire chief to present in front of council. Welcome.
I told you to be kind.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. The agreement in front of you is for you to endorse, or sorry, the recommendation is for you to endorse automatic mutual aid agreement between Ucluelet and Tofino. This agreement started, or the process started sometime last year. We've worked through it and at a point now between Carla and the fire chief down in Ucluelet and myself and the CAO that we feel confident in where we're at. So the idea behind this would be to automatically offer mutual aid in calls where smoke showing or confirmed structure fire is in place. Under our old agreement, there was, the process would be that the first responding officer or the IC on call would call if mutual aid was required. This could take up to 10 minutes though, so we're just that much more delayed. We have started to implement this on our last fire call where we did call for mutual aid as soon as we were in the car, but that still was at least 5 to 6 minutes behind where they normally would have been rolling. So it doesn't give us or what this does is allows them to get on the road quicker for if it is an emergency that we need them to be responding to. However, we still have the ability to stand down if it's not required when we are on scene. So from a financial point of view, there isn't any cost associated with this other than our general response indemnities that do come out when we show up at the fire hall. We won't charge and we won't be charging for the services that are requested, with the exception of whatever consumables may be used on the fire ground or directly related to the incident. And it also covers that both parties will carry, or that we will fall under their insurance policy if there are any instances that do arise from the call.
Thank you very much. Okay, anyone have any questions? Councillor Blanchett.
I trust the fire department to be making the best arrangements for all of this. I just have a few questions out of more or less of curiosity. It seems like this would effectively double on average the number of call-outs that each department would get. I.e., if we have 5 here and 5 in Ucluelet, suddenly the Tofino department would be going for 10 call-outs automatically. Is that so?
That's right. That would be, we generally don't have 5 structure fire, confirmed structure fire smoke showing calls a year. But yeah, it would double that call. Right now we have had 2 this year. Last year, I believe we had 1 call that they would have responded to. So it's not a significant amount. It's more that it essentially does double the calls, but it's not a drastic increase.
Okay, so yeah, there's no volunteer burnout
No,
consideration?
our call-outs, I mean, generally our first responder calls here anyways, and they will not be responding to any of those sort of calls. It's very specific to just structure fire and smoke showing calls.
Thank you. Councillor Fitt.
On the last sentence of your report, John, which was good, thank you, it says that the proposed agreement does not include Pacific Rim National Park, ACRD, or First Nation communities. Is there a work plan in progress, or are those negotiations stalled? I just wondered what the status or the plan would be for those neighboring communities to do the same.
So the discussion has started to be had with First Nations. We're in nowhere near having an agreement in place with them. With the ACRD though, and the airport, that one is kind of our next priority in getting on the go. Equal has just signed their agreement with the ACRD for fire protection there, and we're going to hopefully be able to match that contribution to the area. And then again, we will be looking at what sort of levels of service we'll be offering in to well, not necessarily at Pittsburgh, but to Eswista to Long Beach there.
Thank you. Then I would move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Fitt. Seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any final discussion on this? All right, we'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.
All right. Next, Joint Liquid Waste Management Plan Committee Terms of Reference, and a bit of a progress update on where we're at with liquid waste management planning. I'm sure we're all happy to hear this. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Council of the day initiated a liquid waste management plan. It's so long ago that I'm told the Dead Sea was just sick at the time. Stage 1 was approved by the province in 2000. Stage 2 was approved in 2005, and Stage 3 report was initiated in 2006, and a plan was submitted to the ministry for approval. The plan was not approved and was sent back to us for more work. The district engaged another engineering firm that did more of a scoping exercise actually than preparing a plan, and that was not actually submitted to the province for consideration or approval. And that was approximately 2012 when that work was done. Not a lot has happened since that time. More recently, late last year, we hired an individual by the name of Blake Medlar, who is a former provincial government employee who has dealt with approximately 30 of these kinds of plans, to work with us in a project management capacity. So over the last few months, Mr. Medlar and I have been working together to try to structure a work plan for how we can get to a finish line that I'll describe in a minute. And some of the backstory in this is the provincial government has changed their priorities, and with that they've changed the ability that they have to provide timely, meaningful feedback to us with respect to work that we're doing on our plan. Essentially, the feedback we're getting so far is that the province will watch from the sidelines, and once we have something done, we can submit it to them and get a yay or a nay and hopefully some comments. And we want to make best use of our time and resources and have a plan that we put together and we'll be able to send to the province with what we hope is a very high likelihood of approval or approval with very minimal changes made. We have a December of 2020 deadline, like other coastal communities do, where we have to begin treating to at least a secondary treatment level the effluent that's going into the Pacific Ocean, essentially through the harbor and through Duffin Channel. So we're at a time where we do need to get going on this. We think that the plan process will take us about 18 months, so hopefully by the end of 2016, last quarter of 2016, we have a plan wrapped up that tells us what kind of treatment we're going to be undertaking and where that treatment will occur, as well as starting to make some give some direction about how the collection system needs to be improved over time as well. But again, we're required, unless things change from the federal government, we're required to be treating effluent by the end of 2020. The province has prepared some guidelines that are still in draft form, but they're the guidelines that we're working from, that specify that there are to be a number of committees involved in the preparation of a liquid waste management plan. And there's a possibility of 3 committees. We're recommending the council endorse the idea of 2 committees. What we would like is to combine a technical committee, so experts, provincial government employees as well as district employees, participation from consultants that we'll be bringing on from time to time, to blend with a public committee. And the idea of having public very involved, not only through a committee but also through a few other touch points as we move through the process, is really an important one to the province, because this is one of the very few areas where if we need to borrow for liquid waste management, liquid waste management plan and the treatment plant that's resultant of it, and we in this community, unless we win the lottery, will need to borrow to do that. We do not actually have to get a central electors to do that. And the province, though, before signing off on a loan like that, will require very good evidence that we've consulted with the community throughout the process and the preparation of the plan. We're also recommending that the committee of the whole be the steering committee. So the technical and public committee will make recommendations, but the steering committee, we want to take those to committee of the whole meetings so that all council is involved quite heavily in this. Understand that this was a priority of previous council, and expect that it's going to be a priority of this council as we finally set those things. We will be needing to engage, and through the budget process, council will see more of this, but we'll be needing to engage some engineering expertise in addition to the work that Mr. Bedlar is going to do for us, and propose that we would do that by kind of a select bid process. So there are very few engineering firms out there that do have work, have done work in liquid waste management planning. Lots of experts out there in terms of who is good at deciding what pipe goes in the ground, but the planning work, it seems to be fairly specialized. So we're looking to go to a select bid process, but more about that as we talk about budget. We're hoping that with council's endorsement of the recommendations today, that we would begin pulling a committee together. We're asking that council allow us to advertise for the 6 public positions that are entailed in the advisory committee. And our goal is to have things in process so that we can have a first committee meeting sometime in June. So I know it seems a long way off, but the steps that have to happen before then, it comes at us pretty fast. So that's the sum of my remarks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay, and just for council's, reminding council, there's a 4-part recommendation. So any questions for CAO? Councillor Burke.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really glad to see that among the other things that they'd be focusing on with the innovation in wastewater management, because in all this time, some things have changed. And how the background that we have in step 1 and step 2, these are more about location and that type of thing, not getting us to this other level of the actual plant and engineering, I take it, and so forth. So there is a latitude for exploring options.
Your Worship, yeah, stage 3, final determination of the plant location. I think that the council and others have heard from me that the idea of locating the plant sort of in the middle of nowhere near the industrial park is something that I still don't, I understand the rationale behind it. The costs that are associated with that, I'm not sure that we've really kind of fully resolved in our minds that that's worth spending. And in particular, when we're looking to senior levels of government to partner in costs with us, they will partner in the cost with the lowest cost option. And so if we as a community are deciding, well, we want to do something that is remote and therefore costs an additional $5 million, that additional $5 million is not eligible for cost sharing. And I'm not sure that that was understood some years ago. And again, I wasn't here, so I don't know all the ins and outs of the discussions that happened. Certainly in terms of innovation, that's something that I really do hope that bringing some experience to the table that we can have some good discussions about. There are several examples on Vancouver Island of waste treatment plants that are operating in inhabited areas that have minimal odor, and I think that we want to really understand what those are and how those are operating as well, so that they do integrate with the community and are in a location that makes sense from a number of perspectives, not just as a reaction to people's fears about what a waste treatment facility might smell like.
And if I asked Mr. Medlar about full treatment, is that tertiary?
Yes.
And he kind of seemed to dismiss that as being out of hand, far too expensive for us, but the mayor and I had gone to Dockside Green. It's a housing complex. It's, it wouldn't have the impact, say, of our visitor population, certainly our resident population, in terms of numbers, and they managed to do full tertiary, and so are other communities. And so I'm wondering if that is in any way on the table as well, that we take it to that next step.
Your Worship, I don't think that tertiary treatment is off the table. I don't think it's been, actually there, going through documents, there was discussion about it, and previously it was discounted, I guess, because of cost, and also the idea that the idea that was considered is that through some kind of manufactured wetland, some kind of dry wetland, that tertiary treatment would happen, which number of challenges. The amount of land that is required for that is fairly significant, and also it requires a fair bit of sunshine, which looking at weather data, I think that there was a concern at the time that we don't have enough sunshine to actually get the UV into these wetlands so that the biological processes, and I'm by no means an expert in these things, but the biological processes that break everything down further were required. I think that also one of the factors is, and I'm trying to find a way to say this nicely, putting secondary treated waste into the ocean. You have after that you have a very small area after which you don't really detect that there's waste that's been discharged to the environment. So it's adding millions of dollars for tertiary treatment to really shrink the area of influence that's out of the ocean. It's a sort of, we will have to at the time do a bit of a cost benefit analysis. Is it worthwhile?
Yeah, and then again, I'd suggest that in the time since they looked at the waste, the ponding or whatever it's called, that there also have been developments in the technologies and so forth, and maybe the scale of cost might be changing as we're moving through this. So that was just the last thing. The other piece was at some point, it was very beneficial to go and actually see this system and to be walked through and so forth. And I'm hoping or thinking that if this committee gets formed, that it's maybe appropriate that as we narrow things down, that a visit to an operating site to actually be part of the program, because I think it really raises both possibilities and things to be cautious of in a very direct way. It would help to kind of explain to the community what's going on. Anyway, just for added input.
Thank you. Councillor Blanchett.
I note the composition of the suggested composition of the joint committee contains people from all over, government officials, experts, whatnot. It's going to be a real challenge to pull those together, even for 4 meetings a year. And I also note that we submitted a stage 3 implementation plan in 2006, and the government didn't respond until 2009. I'm just wondering, given our 2020 deadline, whether we have a reasonable timeline, whether this is even going to be possible.
Timeline is something we've discussed, and I'll have to check the dates in the report. That doesn't sound like it's right. I mean, I know things do move slowly in government at times, but that sounds like I may have made a mistake in reporting dates in the staff report. I seem to recall it was initiated in 2006. Took some time to do the work and then was submitted, but I don't think it was, we were waiting for 3 years, and at this point we can't wait for 3 years for the comments back from the province. But to your other question, comment, yes, I think it will be challenging to bring government officials out here to meet with us. We'll try to set up some teleconference options for people. At the same time, these are regulations. This is a mandate we're being given from senior levels of government, and frankly, I find it unacceptable for them to kind of, we'll say, here's the rules, and then advocate in any involvement. So we did talk as staff as well as with Mr. Medlar about who we include and who we don't. And at the end of the day, I feel like they have a place at the table, and I feel like they have an obligation to come to the table. Further to that, they have an obligation to consult with First Nations as senior levels of government with these kinds of things that they cannot delegate to us. So to me, they have to be here to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
I'm just curious if there's any grants or other higher levels of government fund any part of the liquid waste management planning.
There may be. I believe that the gas tax grant would have been eligible, could have been applied to this. We've tried to get, apply for something that would be a higher amount in Main Street, so we could only apply for a couple of projects, and we chose not to apply for this one.
Okay.
But it would be really nice if we could find some
also, the treatment will be not just for our community as well, so I was wondering if that would trigger any federal dollars as well.
Certainly, as council knows, presently we are accepting waste from First Nations communities at Eswist and Tyastanis. The plan, as I understand it in the longer term, is to begin accepting waste from the federal park on the side. I think that those kinds of partnerships, if I can call them that, do help us make the case when going to the federal government and the provincial government for infrastructure grants, that we're not just inward looking, that we're trying to think of this peninsula a little bit more holistically, and I think that those kinds of stories that we can tell in our grant applications will be helpful.
Any other questions?
I just think it's time we started to move on this. I'm confident that the latest technology will be explored, and I'm also confident if anything gets done, something better will come along. Mm-hmm. This is the way of the world, but we have to move on this. So.
Councillor Blanchett?
Do you, I read with interest that there's no referendum required for borrowing. So just to kind of put the public on alert, if you will, but not to put you on a hot spot. Do you have a ballpark guesstimate of how many millions we're talking about here?
I love questions that start out, not to put you on the spot, but those are my favorite in this line of work. The work that was done looked at sort of a life cycle capital cost of $20 million. In talking with Mr. Medlar yesterday, he believes, and from very good experience with other communities, that it should be significantly less than that. Mm-hmm. His comments to me are a waste treatment plant should cost about $5 million. If you want something that if your plan requires that the collection system be improved as well, you might be looking at more like $8 million. Which I was careful not to say only $5 million, because that still is a lot of money for a community like this. However, if we are successful in getting third funding with senior levels of government, and we can start to write that number down, so it's closer to $2 million of our own money, you know, if it was interest-free, which is sadly not going to be, we're still looking at in excess of $100,000 per year in capital costs for the community, and there will also be new operating costs because these plants don't run themselves. They are staffed not necessarily 24/7, but they are staffed full time. So we'll have another $100,000 a year in staffing costs likely. The other thing, to go back to the innovation comment a little bit, is that I think this community can look at partnership opportunities, and some other communities have looked at design, build, operate partnerships, where someone comes in, designs a plant, then they're responsible for operating it, and they fix what the cost is going to be, so that it takes the unknowns away, while we're still paying for a company to make a profit. One of the nicest things that I think that going back to the discussion about the water, one of the nicest things that we can offer to our community is some experience and some certainty, and looking to a private sector partner for those kinds of things, I think is something that we want to spend some time doing over the next 18 months.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Councilor Britt.
I'll move the recommendations, all 4 of them. Do you want me to read them?
We'll get a second now. Okay. So it's been moved by Councillor Bart and seconded by Councillor McMaster that Council confirm the commencement of Stage 3 of the Liquid Waste Management Plan, and that terms of reference for the Joint Liquid Waste Management Plan Committee, or Joint Committee, as attached as Appendix 1 to the Staff Report Joint Liquid Waste Management Plan Terms of Reference dated March 10th, 2015 be approved, and that staff be authorized to advertise for the community member positions for the Joint Committee, and that the Committee of the Whole act as the steering committee for the Liquid Waste Management Plan. Any discussion on the motion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion's carried. Thank you very much, Bob. All right, Community Hall Use Policy Review. Deja vu. Thank you very much, Aaron, for coming to us again.
My pleasure. Yeah, you said that. Good morning, Mayor and Council.
It still is.
This is the Community Hall Policy presentation that accompanies my report that you have in your package. Again, we start at the beginning. The update is a recognition that our community is changing and that we need to sort of plan for community hall use. And we want to make sure that we're still delivering programs through the community hall for the benefit of the local community. So a brief background, and this is largely for the benefit of Councillor Chat, so I'm not sure if I should wait for him to come back or not.
Just keep going.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the background, July 8th, staff was directed to review the policy of last year. We met in September to discuss a number of items. We met again on the 21st of October in 2014, and then lastly we met December 9th. And the council directed staff to sort of come back and talk about pricing for locals, the lighting planning, and some scheduling. So to jump right in, the local pricing, we did a bit of research and a little bit more review, and what we're proposing in the amended policy would be having a base rate for folks who are local, and that fee would be included in the fees and charges amendment bylaw. We decided that local should be defined as anyone living in Tofino, Caystanis, Esselista, or Pittsett, and that there may be a premium for non-locals to use our community hall based on the extra staff time required to coordinate and administer bookings from afar. In terms of scheduling, we had originally proposed 3 months for the time needed to book the hall. Based on council response, we've now recommending that 6 months in advance. Any events partnered with the district, such as Oysterfest, can book a year in advance, which was always unchanged from, which was the original intent. We included the wrong policy at the last meeting. And finally, the wedding, we talked a lot about weddings. We believe that a requirement for wedding planners should be in the policy, and that's just to reduce staff time dealt with the day-to-day and week-to-week conversations we have with folks holding weddings in our hall. And that's that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from council? Councilor Fair?
One question about the operating hours, the hours of operation. When you suggest, when staff suggests 12:30 as last closing, last call or something?
Yeah.
Does that put us in any contradiction with the liquor license? We've had several requests from a couple of the restaurants in town, and we've considered those requests, and I'm just wondering if we extend an hour by an hour at one venue, does that put us in somewhat of a conflict when other requests come to us and we say no?
So I'm not sure if it does put us in conflict or not. I think that's a council decision. The hall doesn't have a liquor license, so liquor licenses are approved per event by the liquor branch. What we're just saying is that we want to make sure that it's done by 1 o'clock, and the last call was at 12:30. And we have talked to the RCP about that. We did discuss a little bit about a 12 o'clock finish to sort of avoid that people moving from, say, a restaurant that closes at 12 to or one of our to the venue. But in the end, decided to go with the 1 a.m. finish and the 12:30 last call.
So you're saying that because we don't have a standing liquor license there, per se, each person who rents the hall gets a liquor license, that the conditions that we apply to our community hall is outside of what a restaurant may have a license to serve liquor at?
Correct. Yes, they get a special occasion license. Our policy would set the end time, so they might apply for special occasion license that ends at 1 a.m. but or say 2 a.m. but our policy says last call at 12:30. And whether or not you feel that contravenes or is different to the spirit of what restaurants do in town is a discussion for us to have. But because the community hall is only used with special occasion licenses from time to time and not every day as a restaurant would be, then that would affect your thinking.
That's my, sorry, everything else looks really good on the whole report, and I appreciate the work that you again put into this, because I know that's been a lot of revisions. But that's a concern of mine, that the time frame could be seen by the community as being perhaps partial in that regard. So for myself, I would like to see the times similar, but it's what the council feels about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilor Fair. Councilor Blanchette?
If staff is happy with this plan, I am more than happy to vote my approval of it. It's come back kind of a ridiculous number of times, and it's staff that deals with it. So if staff is happy with it, I'm happy with it. I have two quibbles or suggestions maybe. One is in the definition of a local. Gray areas will undoubtedly come up, and I wonder if it might be wise to include a disclaimer that in the event of uncertainty, as in the designation of a local, staff is authorized to make that decision. And the other is that on page 52, it says responsibilities and expectations. It says a professional cleaning service must be hired for events, 3 bullet points. The last one is which use the kitchen, and I'm just wondering how that affects local events like Fishes and Loaves, whether they would be required to use a professional cleaning service as well.
In the past, we haven't required Fish and Loaves to have a cleaning service. They've taken care of the kitchen. If you go back to that, this is after a function or event, so rather than something that's ongoing that we've partnered with the district.
Okay.
On the first part of Councillor Blanchett's question, do you feel that the policy gives you enough discretion with the definition of local that staff can interpret that?
I do.
Okay.
We were always concerned with defining local, and have used discretion in the past. This is just a little clearer, so.
Yeah, so I would suggest that no changes are probably needed then. Thank you. Any other questions?
Has the recommendation been moved?
No, it hasn't.
I'll move that then.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. 3 parts, that the community hall events closing time for the purpose of liquor license applications policy adopted November 10th, 2009 be repealed, and that the community hall use policy adopted September 8th, 2009 be repealed, and that the community hall use policy as attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report community hall use policy dated March 10th, 2015 be adopted. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Burke.
Thank you. Sorry, it might have been in the report, I just don't remember. About the closing time, 12:30, what was the impetus to move it later?
Move it later from the previous policy, or move it
Right
later?
now it's 12 o'clock, right?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Or was there, there wasn't a time?
There wasn't
There wasn't a
time.
time.
There wasn't a
Closing
time, that was it, okay. I just am concerned about the residents and the closing time. Sound really carries. It takes about an hour after closing for people to have their final drink and to spill out. So we're talking about neighborhoods impacted till about 1:30 at least. And it's the only piece of the report that I'm very uncomfortable with. But otherwise, I like it. I like it a lot.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion? Councillor
So I would concur, as to my earlier comments, that I would support the recommendation subject to the closing time being changed to 12 midnight.
Anybody else wish to weigh in on this? We have 2 ways forward. We have 3 ways forward. We can vote this in favor, take a vote, see if it's carried. We can see an amendment, or we can deny it. But
I just see
we
a
can
problem.
see how it goes for a few months and what the situation is like. You come back with amendment, or we can amend it right now. Councillor McMaster?
I just see you run into an obvious problem as soon as someone organises a New Year's Eve do. And they want to go midnight. So they're going to have to apply for a special exemption for New Year's Eve. So I'm happy with it the way it is.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm fine with
Councillor
it.
Burke?
So-
Last call is just that, it's just last call. The event can carry on for a period of time after, if we're only talking about. Is there a is there a shutdown time for the actual?
1 a.m.
1 a.m. Oh, okay, well then, if that's there, that satisfies that concern.
Okay, I'll call the question then. All in favor of the motion? Thank you, motion is carried. Thank you very much for all the work that you and your staff have done, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the great policy.
Okay, and you might as well stand there because we're moving into the zoning amendment application for the Pleasance property at 1140 Pacific Rim Highway. And Erin has a presentation for us that will take us through how this proposed zoning amendment looks now. So thank you very much.
So, just to begin with, this is a very brief encapsulation of a very complicated development proposal. And with my apologies, the presentation wanders a little bit, but I try to bring it all back together. And I think I would maybe be comfortable in asking questions as we go. It might be easier, or per section, so it's sort of broken down into a number of sections. It might be easier to ask questions per section as we get through it.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
So a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a bit of a background on the proposal. We're going to talk about the zoning bylaw and its consistency with the OCP. We're going to talk about a PDA, or a phased development agreement, and how that relates to amenities, subdivisions, and parklands. And finally, we're going to talk about a housing bylaw. To be clear, what we're recommending today is second reading of the zoning bylaw, a first and second reading of the phase development agreement bylaw, and first and second reading of the housing bylaw. Those are the recommendations for in the report, as well as requests for a public hearing. So, briefly, the background. We received this application in 2005, and so as much as the CEO says in the government doesn't work that slow sometimes, sadly in our case it does. This has been with us for 10 years. The applicants applied to rezone their property from A1, which is a 2-acre parcel type of property, reserved lands, to a multifamily development with 22 units. The property in question is 2.2 acres. It's in the Mackenzie neighborhood. If you wanted to go there, you'd go to the corner of Pellison and Highway 4, and it would be the property right on the corner. We received a revised application in 2008, so there was some back and forth between those years, but basically it was to do with making sure the densities requested by the applicant met our OCP provisions. There was actually a first, second, and a public hearing and a third reading in 2011. After that time, we actually rescinded the third reading and because we received new information. And that sort of brings us back to October 2013 when we were directed by council to prepare a phase development agreement and a housing bylaw with respect to the new information. In between 2011 and 2015, we had quite a long and lengthy and involved conversation with the applicant with respect to riparian areas, access, parkland, housing, multi-use paths, subdivisions, its neighborhood context, and conservation. Again, this is very brief background. There is a detailed background, or more detailed background in the report. I'd have to answer questions about that as well. So I thought I'd start us off with a map. Makes things a little easier to talk about. So this is the property. Here's Hellison. This is the highway. This is Ocean Park down here, and Fellowship Drive and Harley Place here. This is a 2.2 acre property. I did a little bit of PowerPoint overlays to sort of give us an idea of what we're talking about. And so this was a proposal for 11, you can barely see it here, but there's 11 duplex units within this bold area here, which is proposed to be the developable area of the property. So this bold area is where all development will happen. So to make it a little bit more, use bubble diagram to be clear, this would be the parkland that we're talking about. This would be the developable area. This is the panhandle to provide access to the road. These are the conservation covenants we're talking about surrounding the property. And so that is sort of what it would look like in terms of developable area. I thought it would be interesting also to show you what it would like in terms of green space. So this is the part that we're talking about for the subdivision. The lighter green is the conservation covenant. And actually to the north of the property here is parkland that was given to the district when the Fellowship Drive subdivision occurred. So you can sort of see that the development area is actually surrounded significantly by green space. And I'm happy to go back to the map at any time if you'd like. So, the zoning bylaw. The first bylaw that we're proposing to amend at second reading. When we do a zoning amendment, we need to make sure that it is consistent with the OCP. And so the first question we ask ourselves, is this a use that's permitted in this area? A residential use is a permitted use in the Mackenzie Beach neighborhood, something that we look to. We also look at density, and there are some density targets in the OCP, and this project does meet those density targets. In the OCP, we talk a lot about parkland, and where we want it, and what type of parkland we want. We talk about transportation, and about how to get people out of vehicles and using other forms of transportation, which relates to the multi-use path. We talk a lot about green space, wildlife corridors, and smart growth, which relates to our discussion about tributary C, which is the stream that runs through the southern third of the property. And we talk about the conservation covenants around the property, and it also talks about stormwater. Zoning bylaw also talks, the OCP also talks about housing. Not all of these things can be included in a zoning conversation. So again, we're consistent with the OCP, yes. The zoning bylaw amendment that you see before you today is not the same zoning bylaw amendment that you saw that the council saw in 2013. The changes made to the 2013 version was we have now identified the area clearly as a multifamily zone. It's not single family, it's nothing else. It can only be used for multifamily. We've allowed for some latitude within that multifamily, so a future developer could develop a duplex or an apartment building or cluster housing. We haven't constrained it so far that you can tell them exactly what form of housing, just that it must be multifamily. The minimum lot size was reduced significantly to 325 meters squared. That is basically our minimum lot size in Tofino these days. This relates the same to Ocean Park. If you were to build a duplex lot there, a townhouse, your minimum lot size is actually quite a bit larger. To go with that, to go with that is a lot width, so we actually had to put in a lot width of about 10 meters, which is again related to Ocean Park. And the reason we were able to do this now, and we weren't before, is that we received a fair amount more information from the developer about what they were actually proposing to do, and we were actually be able to start fine-tuning the zoning. The applicant has also requested to go from 2 stories to 2.5 stories. No overall rise. We still capped at 34 feet, which is basically our residential maximum in all our zones. The setbacks are generally based on the Ocean Park setbacks, and they're also supported by the conservation covenant that was on the previous slide in the light green. So we actually have covenants put on the setbacks to make sure that trees can't be cut down and development further. The largest change was lot coverage. And this gets a bit complicated, so I'm going to try to walk through it slowly. The original amendment, so the 2013 amendment, talked about the entire lot, so the 2.2 acres, the 8,000 square meters of property. And we were proposing at that point a 15% coverage for buildings. Through the discussion of the applicant and the offer of the parkland, the developable area actually shrunk to 5,307 meters squared. And so we're proposing to increase the developable area for buildings to 30%. And so if we look at the 1,200, which was the original site coverage, and the 1,592, that represents a 5% increase. Not a 15% increase, but a 5% increase between these two numbers. And that was just, again, to these details, and the applicant doing a little bit more work on their side to figure out what they actually might need to build a project. It should be noted that the existing coverage in the A1 zone is 30%. For overall coverage, so this is something new for Tofino. We haven't really done any non-permeable provisions in our zoning bylaw, although we're allowed to. It sort of talks about the overall site, so how much coverage, including roads and accessory buildings and other things, can be on the ground. So originally we proposed, again, 25%, that's 2013, and then we looked at 2000 and put it up to about 3,500 square meters. So an increase of here, or about an 18% increase. And that was largely, not all, but largely due to the fact that we needed to develop an access for future subdivision, so the panhandle, which is going to have to be road and asphalt. I should also say at this point that the zoning bylaw provisions for permeability also require sidewalks and internal roads to be built of permeable infrastructure, such as paving stones or permeable concrete. So even though it's going to be permeable, it might still be a little, it'll be impermeable surfaces, there'll still be some permeability within it. Okay, do you want to talk about the zoning bylaw before we get into the PDA?
Thank you for that. Any questions about what's been presented so far about the zoning amendment at all? Okay.
Okay, phase development agreement. A phase development agreement is a tool provided to local governments by the province to talk about items that are actually outside of our zoning authority, so Section 903 of the Local Government Act. It allows us to have conversations with respect to riparian areas, to conservation, to amenities, housing, and subdivision. And it goes sort of hand in glove with a zoning bylaw amendment of this complexity. There's 2 parts to the phase development agreement. There's the bylaw itself, and there's a contract. The contract gets signed by the district's representatives and the applicant, the bylaw gets passed by council. They're generally good for 10 years, phase development agreements. They can be increased for further 10 years by petition to the minister. In this case, we're talking about a 10-year plan with some opportunity to extend that if need be. Because the phase development agreement is dealing with land use, we need to have a public hearing. This public hearing has to be separate from our zoning public hearing. So if this is moved forward, we'd actually have to have 2 separate public hearings to discuss the phase development agreement and one to discuss the zoning bylaw. Phase development agreements also go on title, alerting a future purchaser or owner of property that there is an agreement on title and a bylaw that respects that. A phase development agreement also provides certainty for the applicant as well as the district, so there's no changes to the zoning bylaw or subdivision bylaw. It's sort of set in stone. This is how we're going to develop it, which allows the developers to borrow money and the district to understand what's going to happen in this community. Within our phase development agreement for this project, there is a need for a housing bylaw because the applicants have offered to give to the district of Tofino 1 unit of housing once it's built and 1 price restricted unit. So that meaning that we'd have a covenant on a second unit, restricting the cost of restricting the resale value of that house, and I'll go into that further in the housing bylaw section. We also have a subdivision for parkland amenities. We talked about a subdivision in the phase development agreement. We can't approve a subdivision because it's not within our authority to do so. It's within the authority of the approving officer only, but we've set up the framework for that for that process down the road when we get to subdivisions property. We talked about development of the multi-use path, remediation of Tributary C. So Tributary C runs through the southern third of the property. It comes from the Ocean Park subdivision, crosses the highway, and connects into the Mackenzie Creek system. And we have some reports about it being a fish-bearing stream with quite a number of different type of fish, and there's some need to improve that stream, and so that would be part of the requirement prior to building our subdivision. We also think, we want to consider stormwater in a sort of holistic manner, and so prior to subdivision, we're going to be requiring a stormwater plan about how water from the property is going to be conveyed, most likely to the stream, to the tributary, so we need to make sure we have a pretty good handle of that, and that we're not affecting fish health and the environment. And then we talked a little about conservation. Again, those are the green areas around the property that were there for buffers to the community, to the adjoining neighbors, buffers to the multi-use path, which is an OCP, and then buffers to the existing park to the north. That is really, really quick phase development agreement. It's a very complicated document with lots of paper. Would like to discuss that at this time.
Any questions about the phase development agreement? Yes, Councillor Fagan.
There's a concern about potential vacation rentals. Is that part of something that the district can ask in the phase development agreement, or is that not part of their purview, part of the purview of this?
We address short-term rentals and vacation rentals in the zoning bylaw, so the previous document.
Right.
And in Tofino, if you're not specifically allowed to have a short-term rental, you don't have a short-term rental. So if you look at our R1 to A3 zones, they all allow short-term rental operations. If you look at some of our comprehensive zones or some of our commercial zones, nowhere do you see you can have a short-term rental. So unless we've included in the zoning bylaw, which we haven't, you can't do it. So short-term rentals are not permitted in this zone.
Thank you.
Okay.
So a final bylaw to consider for today is a housing bylaw, and this is a bylaw that's required when discussing housing. So when somebody's offering us some housing, we're talking about price restricted units, we need to create a bylaw for that to happen. So what we've been offered is 1 unit of housing, so that was something the district received and could sell or rent or hand over to another organization. And we've also had an agreement that 2 of the units, including the one that they've given us, would be price restricted. So there would be a covenant on 2 units, one of which we would own. Some of the, so I didn't talk away, some of the items we talked about are there'd be no price restrictions on the first sale. All subsequent resale property would be based on the CCPI. There'd be a right of first refusal for the district every time that property is sold. So at any time during in the future that property sold, the district would have the right to step in and purchase that property and then and then move on. There's restrictions on rental rates and some ownership criteria. So, what next? Well, if council considers reading the bylaws, today we would read the 3 bylaws. So, first and second reading, first and second reading. We follow up with public hearings for the phase development agreement and the zoning bylaw. We then have the applicant sign the PDA. We go into final readings for all bylaws, at which time concurrently all the covenants would be placed on title through undertakings with ours and the applicant's lawyers, and then we'd sign the PDA at the end, and the process would be done. So, I won't say questions, because I'm sure there's questions, but it's more of a discussion type of.
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Burt.
Thank you. Just wondering how the value is set on the housing unit, both the gifted one and the restricted one.
How the values, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the
The
value,
first
like
sale.
what's it gonna go for the first sale?
Market.
The market.
Your worship, if I may, pardon me, I may just clarify. It's a market within a market, so there is kind of a subset of the larger real estate market that would be able to purchase these units. And then a subset again within that would be actually interested in purchasing a unit with those kinds of restrictions on them that would allow it to escalate. So it's not open to someone looking for an investment property from Calgary who hopes to double his money in 3 years. It would be restricted to somebody, and I'm not sure what we put in this bylaw, but who meets some local criteria, has lived here for some period of time, is working in the community or has worked in the community, and they would be then willing to accept that the value of it only escalates with core CPI.
Don't mean to look a gift horse in the mouth, but is there, you and I have talked about this before, is there any way we have some influence as to which units we get? In the sense, I've noticed in the past we tend to get the units that are probably deemed or thought of as the most difficult to sell.
Not so to speak, because we don't know exactly what the form of this housing is going to be yet. We don't know if it's going to be townhouses or duplexes. I don't know where they're going to be located. We do have some specifics about what size it has to be and what it has to look like. It has a certain type of appliances, a certain finish. But as to what exactly unit, we're just not there yet. So no, I think the short answer is no, we don't have that opportunity at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Rose. Thank you. The other one thing that did kind of concern me a bit, again, until you know what the units are, the whole parking piece, including visitor parking, won't be calculated. But it's to be a family zone because it's multifamily. But there's no provision for playground or for anything like that. With that many units, it just seems that would be something that would need to be looked at.
But I think for staff, the provision of this area here is parkland, it's green space, and the park up to the north, that we sort of felt that there was ample green space there. There was no formal playground discussed, but that these sort of areas would accommodate kids playing and doing stuff around the area. There is the small and not widely used, but there is a short block away the playground in Ocean Park, and also down at Crystal Cove, even though it's private, many families use the park for school. I'm not trying to say, that was just sort of the general thinking behind the discussions.
Thank you. Councillor Blanchett.
How cast in stone is the architect's drawing that accompanied your report, the one with the 22 units arranged in that's just a concept drawing?
Just a concept drawing.
Because it's zoned multifamily, and there are 2 affordable units. Is there anything stopping the proponent from building 2 tiny little affordable units and then putting up a gigantic Tofino mansion based on the enhanced lot coverage available?
Yes. So it can only be for in the zoning twice we talk about it can only be used for multifamily use. So that would be a dwelling that has more than two or more units in it. there is a provision in the multifamily part of the bylaw that talks about cluster housing, which would actually allow you to build single family. But what we said in the bylaw is that if you're gonna build a cluster housing development, you actually have to build 2 units at a time, so you can't build 1 unit. So you might get actually smaller micro houses, rather than big single family. You couldn't build a big single family.
I'm very much in favor of the micro houses,
Yeah.
just because of the increased density. What I'm wondering is if the bigger houses could creep in. Is there a check and balance in there? Is there another
Check and
public
balance.
hearing, or?
I mean, they've asked for 22 units. If they decided to, in the end, not build 22 units and build 10 units, they could build bigger duplexes, or townhouses that were a larger area, but they couldn't build like a single family mansion home.
But they could build a gigantic duplex, i.e. two single-family mansion homes attached.
Yes.
In other words, the density allows for up to 22 units, but 2 of them will need to be designated affordable housing units.
Yes.
And then the other 20 will have to be done in units of 2, so there could be 2, 4, 6, 8, that's right.
So there could be 4, basically 2 small affordable ones and 2 as big as they can make them, Tofino specials, shall we say. I'm just a bit worried that nice drawing will sway us toward approving this, and then suddenly it turns into something else.
Minimum and maximum?
The minimum of the units. Minimum residential floor per dwelling unit shall be 600 square feet, so it's the smallest you can build. There isn't a maximum unit.
Well, the maximum would be decided by the building footprint or the allowable coverage.
Thank you. So in the drawing scheme that we've been presented in the package, there's 22 units, and as I understand it, according to the zoning bylaw, one parking unit must be allowed per dwelling space in this development. That's correct, isn't it? 1.0?
Based on the zoning bylaw, so it's 1.2, I believe.
So I don't have it in front of me, but there's.
It's 1.5 spaces per dwelling for a single-family home, which we wouldn't have here, or duplexes, pardon me. So yes, we would have that. 1.1 spaces per dwelling unit for 3 or 4 family dwellings, and 1.0 spaces per dwelling unit for townhouses, apartments, and seniors housing.
Right, and what I wondered in the zoning bylaw, is there a provision spelled out for visitor parking? Because one of my concerns here is that there's, presumably 44 people living in a very tight area would have a visitor now and again. Where would a visitor park in that situation as we've been presented with there? Or what provision does the district have to request visitor parking in such a phased development or a rezoning as this is being proposed?
So generally, we talked about providing parking based on per unit, and that usually sometimes you get these 0.2s and these 0.5s, and a half a spot doesn't exist. Because what happens, the developer comes in and provides 1 or 2 spaces, whatever he thinks is going to sell, and then the remainder that it's not per lot, it's going to go to the visitor parking area. So if you go to Ocean Park, for example, there's a number of areas that are based on visitor parking. This would fall under the same sort of numbers as Ocean Park.
But as we've been presented, this plan, there is no allowance at all for visitor parking.
No, I believe it's covered in the decimal points of the parking, the section, part 6 of the bylaws. We talk about 1.5 or 1.2. Those 0.2s don't exist. So when somebody comes and says, I'd like to build 20 units, we'll say, okay, you need to provide whatever it is, 30 parking spaces, and they're going to put the parking spot on probably on each property, and then they're going to put the remainder in the visitor area. Where exactly that's going to be within the subdivision is not clear yet. That's how it's worked in the past.
Right. Well, in another conversation, I was understood too that generally visitor parking in that kind of a situation would be 1 per 8 units. So even that would presume 3 visitor parking spots in such a proposal. So I'm just raising it as a concern that that it's an incredibly tight plan in a very small space with no provision for visitor parking at all, except on the street. And the street of Hellison is very narrow, and there is no, right now, there's no way that you can park on the side of that street unless you encroach on the riparian area or the covenant area.
So something we've talked to develop over time is that at the time of development, this portion of Hellison could be improved to our standards, which may provide on-street parking. If we're in a fee simple subdivision, the internal roads that get built may be required to have parking accommodated there. If we're talking about a strata subdivision, then they have to follow our rules and provide parking for their users and for the visitors. The system seems to work in Ocean Park, with the exception they don't have sidewalks, which is unfortunate. But they're generally, there's people parking visitor, there's people parking on their lots, and it seems to work out okay, and we'd be under similar rules for this area.
Just to be clear though, can I clarify with you, Erin? The development will include visitor parking as per the regulations?
Yes.
Okay, so the concept that there would be no visitor parking would be wrong. It will include it. I think your concern, Councillor Thick, is it enough?
No, I didn't see anything in the plan that even suggested one spot as a visitor parking, and that's what I was raising as a concern, is where would that exist in the current in the current schematic diagram? And if we were to consider that as being important, then if we, for example, I'm just saying if, but you know, the scenario that you described whereby perhaps Hellison might have to be improved would then be at our expense, correct?
No.
Okay.
At the time of subdivision, we can ask developers to improve streets to the center line based on our road standards. So if water sewer needed to be replaced, the roads will be upgraded. That is the authority we have.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you for your question. Councillor Anderson?
I think I'm in support of this. It's very complex. It took me some time to get through it and my head around it. And I appreciate all the work, the years of work that have been done. Now, the part that I kind of concerns me, and it's not so much to do with the actual subdivision, was the housing bylaw part, and to what extent it will form the example and a template for future developments similar to this. And basically I want to know, does that housing bylaw, does it go beyond this development, or does it, I mean, I know it's I think it strictly applies to this development.
Yeah.
But it could form a good or a bad example for future, and I'm wondering if you have any comments on that.
I think it's probably a good first start, and sort of based on some of our the Tofino Housing Corporation requirements, and also the Whistler Housing Authority requirements, and then also by talking to Bob, talk to the CEO about what is good practice. I don't think this is perfect. I think we're getting there, and what I've seen at the Whistler Housing Authority is that it looks like their bylaws actually change each time as they learn things or things don't work, and they're constantly evolving to deal with different types of housing or different offers, but also just different issues they run into. I don't know.
So it could be refined, but it
definitely can be refined, and it's not the template. It's
doesn't set anything. Okay, thanks.
Any comment, Bob?
No, I think Erin captured it quite well, in which the experience was constant evolution from make it cheap and it's affordable housing forever, which didn't work, to something that's fairly regulated. It's very close to what we're doing here.
Thank you.
Or what we're proposing here, I should say.
But it is an important point, I think, in the development of our affordable housing strategies and discussion that we've had to actually have a first bylaw. You're pleased with that? Councillor Barton, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I just want some clarification on something that was said here in the presentation. You mentioned buying parking, and I understand that that's true. That's what I heard. Maybe I misheard. Okay, because in these kinds of subdivisions, you're not getting off-site. Okay.
Any other questions or discussion? Councillor Blanchett?
I really like the sort of neighborhood feel of the 22 units, but I feel like I need some assurance that 22, or at least a high number of units, are actually going to be built, rather than just the bare minimum of 2 affordable units and one more giant duplex, which will be anything but affordable and will skew the feel of the whole neighborhood. It's no longer a sort of a family enclave. It's a big house with who knows who living in it and a couple of affordable people. Is there any way to provide that assurance?
I mean, without spending time researching it, I would suggest that probably we could put in minimum number of lots or maximum. Yeah, maximum would be. I don't know, Bob, maybe.
Yeah, it's quite plausible, and we want to talk with the landowner about this, but certainly you can put a maximum floor area for each unit. If the concern is that there's going to be a duplex that has 7,000 square feet per side, and have those kinds of conversations. We want to talk with the owner about it. And at the same time, I think it's fair that they have some flexibility, so as the market changes and they understand the market, they aren't pigeonholed to, well, everything has to be 1,000 square feet as an example. So, but I suspect that there is a means of having a discussion and giving some comfort to council.
Thank you.
One more question about, with this type of phase development, maybe a naive question, sorry, but the DCCs incurred on this, can you just give me a brief summary on that? How it works with these? Does each one incur, or does the whole property?
I believe it's multifamily residential, again, but on the bylaw in front of me, it's based on building, town building permit. And we get whatever we get set for, so we use around, off the top of my head, it's $85 and $90 per square meter. So times that by how much area is going to be built, that gives you a DCC charge. So it will pay DCCs one way or the other.
Right, because it's not strata or anything like that. Okay.
Even strata would pay for it.
The same.
Yeah, it's based on the building itself, not on the land ownership.
Okay, thank you.
Unless they are building single family and subdividing, then it would be $18,000 per lot. But this is multifamily, so it's going to be a time building.
Final question for me. If okay, so let's say we recommend first and second reading, and then both information coming back to us through those readings, including something of the nature of Councillor Blanchette's comment. If there are changes, does it have to go back to public hearing in that sense, or can it be proceeding to third and fourth reading?
I would like to make any changes now before we read second reading for the zoning.
So am I to understand then that there is some latitude to create a maximum around building size to ensure that it doesn't become monster house, as they call it?
We can probably make some changes. The only thing that might lengthen this is that we need to talk to the applicant. We're adding in, we're changing our conversation with what we set up with the phase development agreement, their amenities, all that stuff. There's a whole bunch of moving parts. So I would want time to go talk to the applicants about that, express council's concern about not building to the maximum density of the lot, and then exploring ways that we might be able to put that to the bylaw.
Kind of weigh the likelihood of that against further delay for the applicant, but you know, certainly, I've been on, this is my third term on council, I don't.
I appreciate these comments, but I would like to hear from other councillors on this, because before we make a decision of how to go from here, it's nothing to do with the actual applicant in the sense of the concern that's being raised is preventing something from happening in the future that Councillor Blanchette feels would be unwise for the community and not a good course of action. The property can be sold to another developer, so this is nothing personal about the actual applicants, but it is a good principle, I think, for council to discuss. But I've only heard from Councillor Blanchette so far about this concern, and I think that we need to get a better sense from everybody else, because if we are going to delay this for another 2 or 4 weeks, it's only fair that we do this with everybody having had a chance to weigh in on it. Councillor Anderson.
I just did, if I want to check if I understand this right, if it went through the zoning and all that's being proposed here, then where would the subdivision, would that come after that?
Subdivision should be after our rezoning housing based on the rent.
So it would have to do all this before they'd go for subdivision approval?
Yeah.
So to what extent would that approving officer look at that zoning and say, if this idea of one house, one or 4 units, one being a very large duplex, to what extent is that controlled by how the subdivision plays out? Because I'm thinking an approving officer looking at the zoning in place wouldn't approve a subdivision that had 3 lots or 2 lots. I'm not sure how that plays in, and if we even know.
Well, so without speaking for the approving officer, that's not one.
Yeah.
Approving officers do have some latitude in their jobs, and they do require subdivisions to meet zoning bylaws generally. I think it's a may, but they do. What the zoning bylaw says, I'll just read 2 portions for you. First is the prelude to the bylaw. The Hellison Drive Comprehensive Zone is intended to accommodate and regulate a multifamily residential development while protecting an important riparian area. This zone is not intended to permit the use of parcel for construction or occupancy of one dwelling. And the second part is, with respect to, this is under other provisions, with respect to cluster dwellings permitted in the zone, the permitted use includes construction of 2 more dwellings simultaneously on a parcel and the occupancy of 2 more dwellings simultaneously on a parcel. For certain, this does not include the construction or occupancy of only 1 dwelling. So while it doesn't over say you have to go 22, it does speak strongly to the fact that it is a multifamily dwelling. Whether a multifamily dwelling is a monster duplex, is a good question. And I'm not, I don't want to influence the council's decision here, but yeah, I'm wondering about the economics of this. You know, there's been multiple thousands of dollars spent on this to get the multifamily thing, not a duplex zone, not a single family use zone. Again, not being a developer, but 22 units strikes me as you probably make more money than a giant mansion in Calgary. But I'm not going to that in Calgary. Perhaps that's what the property is that valuable for that use. So again, for me, it'd be the likelihood of that happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, I personally don't share the same concern. I think it's covered off, and I that was immediately my thought. The economics don't really make sense. I'd be more concerned about the 22 as the upper limit, but the lower limit doesn't. I think it's well stated there, and I think economically it just probably wouldn't work. So I personally don't share that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor McMaster.
I agree, Councillor Thick. I just don't see big units being built on that parcel of land. You want an ocean view if you're going to build it from Calgary. You want an ocean view. So I think it's pretty good.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I think I'm satisfied with both. I think that's a really remote possibility that has been brought forward by Councillor Blanchette, so I'm satisfied.
Councillor Hart, any comment?
No, I'm thinking that the economics and the siting just don't work for that kind of value of house when you think of all the infrastructure that has to go into it, and the cost per unit for the value of the lot just wouldn't kind of make sense. In the uses permitted, it says townhouse dwellings, plural, or groups, plural, of such dwellings, plural. So I think, again, the approving officer would have a sense of the direction of this and cluster housing, that type of thing. So I'm comfortable with it. There's a lot of work that's gone into this, and regardless of who the applicant is, I think it's sound. I feel like it's been very thoroughly worked through. Concerns previous councils have been taken into account.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good discussion. Councillor Blanchett, any response or?
No, I hear what my fellow councillors say about my concerns, and I will go with their judgment.
Okay, in that case, Councillor Dick,
Move the first recommendation.
would you like to do this one by one rather than?
Yes.
Okay, sure. So
Second.
it's been moved and seconded that the District of Tofino Phase Development Bylaw 1191, 2014 be introduced and read a first and second time. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried. Councillor McMaster.
I'll move the second recommendation that the District of Tofino Housing Agreement Bylaw 1190/2014 be introduced and read a first and second time.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried.
I'll move the third part of the recommendation.
Okay, so moved and seconded that the District of Tofino Map and Text Amendment Bylaw number 1131, 2010 be amended at second reading as follows, and I'm not going to read out the very, very long list, but it is contained in the package and on the agenda. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried.
And I'll move that council authorise staff to set public hearing dates for District of Tofino Map and Text Amendment Bylaw number 1131/2010 and District of Tofino Phase Development Bylaw 1191/2014.
Thank you. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fick. Any final discussion on this? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. I see a smile in the audience. All right. Our committee meeting minutes. We're almost done.
Thanks so much.
So, Committee of the Whole meeting minutes held February 23rd. Councillor Fick moves.
The minutes be received from February 23rd.
Thank you.
Committee call.
Seconded by Councillor Blanchett. All in favor? Thank you.
Oh,
Did you have a question?
I wanted
about
to have some question yet.
Yes.
One of the items in the minutes is that council supports in principle the Rec Commission's prioritization of the development of indoor multi-court recreation space.
Mm-hmm.
If we approve these minutes, does that affect issue our support in principle, or do we have to make a motion in a council meeting to support that in principle?
Normally recommendations do get pulled out.
It should have been pulled out.
Okay.
I apologize.
So we have just received, the motion's carried, we've received the minutes. If you would like to make that motion, then move the recommendation
I
from the
would
Committee
like
of the
to-
Whole,
Yes, move the recommendation from the Committee of the Whole.
that council approve in principle the Tofino Recreation Commission's prioritization of an indoor recreation facility. I'm going to remember that.
I'll second that.
All right, so it's to be clear, it's been moved and seconded, the recommendation from the Committee of the Whole, so everybody's clear on that. Is there any discussion on this? I'll call a question. Yes, I will not call a question.
Support in principle, what
Yes.
does that entail?
It,
There's no money attached.
no, exactly. It endorses the idea,
Yeah.
and it opens up the door for more discussion, and it sends a message to the community, in my view.
Okay.
Okay, good. All right, I'll call the question, and all in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. Okay, we have minutes from the Community Economic Development Advisory Committee from February 18th. Would somebody like to move receipt? Yes?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded for receipt. Any questions? We'll deal with the recommendation separately. Yes, Councillor Fitch?
Just the terms of reference that are referred to in the minutes, will we be able to see those or review those at the next meeting?
You can see them anytime
Okay.
by going online, and will they appear on the next CDAC agenda? I think we're just going to look at the chair and say yes.
Good,
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, I'll call the question then. All in favor of receiving the minutes? Thank you, motion carried. So there was a recommendation that came out of this. In some discussion with staff, it's a bit of an oddly worded recommendation in the sense the committee is recommending council take action with respect to immediate housing needs in Tofino. Endorsing it doesn't really provide any specific action to go with it. So it's your pleasure to leave it as is, or and hear the message, or rephrase it if you like.
Given that we just have taken action in previous motions, I think we can just proceed it as is.
I don't think that was the intention of the recommendation so much, but I think it was a committee, not only of council members, but also of members of the public, and there was quite a bit of discussion at the committee meeting about just how pressing housing needs are in Tofino, and it was the committee's way of sending a message to council to say, look, this really, you gotta get moving on it. My view in the strategic planning session that we had and the discussion we've had, that yes, this is heard loud and clear, and I would suggest we just leave it, but I'm gonna look to Councillor Burke because she's the chair of the committee.
Well, I'm just wondering if there's some way to say that we move that council will consider this, and it's in the work of creating its strategic action plan. We'll consider housing needs in Tofino as part of its strategic action plan.
Yes, we can do that, and we've already done it, so.
Yeah, it's just that's not gone through the process. But
Right.
It just confirms.
Yeah, so you would move then that council, let me think of how to word this.
Council
Include Tofino housing needs as a priority in its
strategic plan.
Okay. Is that clear, Jane?
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So the motion is that council include Tofino's housing needs, or the action required on Tofino's housing needs as a priority in its 2014 to 2018 strategic plan, which we're already underway. Yes.
The minutes specifically refer to immediate housing needs. Housing needs could be a 10-year plan.
Correct.
I think that might be important to include.
Okay, Councillor Moore.
Immediate, I'd add the word immediate. Because we will get a report too, I think very shortly, that will underscore that.
It's true, at the next council meeting, as a matter of fact. All right, so I'm a little bit confused. I'll stop and say, where are we at? So what would you like to do?
Immediate.
Okay, so you're moving that council include. Just writing this down.
We haven't had a secondary, I don't think, on that motion
Nope.
yet.
Oh,
We're
we
still
did.
crafting it.
Yeah, we're still crafting it. The
So
council
we can
include
the word immediate housing needs, which does
Tofino's
distinguish it.
immediate housing needs in its 2014 to 2018 strategic plan. Okay?
Second that.
Seconded. Thank you, Councillor
Can
Burke.
I ask you a question of the CAO? Are there any issues with council kind of making motions about a planning process that we're in the middle of, like that in this way?
Your Worship, if I understand the question, I think that is the concern that we've got a housing needs assessment underway and we're going to preclude that, or?
No, we're in the middle of a strategic plan that's already had one session with Ron.
We're
Lobbying
endorsing
it
something
a bit.
that we've already discussed, but
Yeah,
I think it's symbolic, but
Yes.
fine.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, everybody clear on the motion then? I'll call a question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. All right, minutes from the Emergency Program Executive Committee from the meeting held February 16th.
Move adoption.
Thank you. Thank you. So receipt is moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Emergency Program Executive Committee meeting minutes from the meeting January 28th.
Move adoption.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Blanchett?
Sorry, I was
That's okay.
approving.
Oh, okay, all right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you, motion carried. Minutes from January 19th of the same committee.
Move adoption.
Thank you. Seconder, moved and seconded by Councillor Anderson and McMaster. Any questions? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And finally, minutes from the Tofino Recreation Commission meeting held January 18th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. All right, that brings us to the end of our public business today, and there are still a few members of the public in the gallery. Any questions from anyone? Andrew, any questions or clarification? Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, yes, certainly, Samantha.
Then I don't know how, if I want to say more of a comment.
You may say a comment.
Okay. Just about the letter that came forward from the West Coast Resort Association. Just to sort of maybe take some time before the next meeting, before the presentation from council, because I think some of the comments that were made were sort of incorrect to what the letter was requesting. Bob probably sort of summarized it best when he spoke to it about that it's not something that we're looking for a specific exemption for just us. We understand that there has been many anomalies over the course of the years that both the residents have been overpaying, but now we're overpaying. So there's going to be a surplus, and that money does have to be somehow recouped back to the water system, like back to the people that have been paying. That there is, it's not necessarily a discount or anything like that. So just sort of how it's looked at. It definitely, the thought and how you look at it, I hope does change in your minds before the next meeting, because the comments that were made was not what we were looking for.
I just a comment to your comment, not
Yeah.
answering the question, but I know that I said some things that, I mean, I honestly, from the letter alone and the numbers, I couldn't tell any further without a staff report.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
I may have said things that were inaccurate to what you were asking for or proposing, and but
yeah.
that's the trouble with acting without some
Absolutely.
some more information.
And I appreciate the staff report, because that's something that us as an association, we were only able to pull so many numbers ourselves, that it was really hard to sort of have a direction of moving forward, or being able to provide a letter that gave you more information when we don't have that information. So
yeah.
I think what the district staff are going to be providing will help both sides as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And based on what you heard today, nothing prevents the Resort Association from clarifying anything or writing another letter that might contain more information. Okay, thanks everybody. Can I have somebody read the motion to go on camera, please?
I will.
Go ahead, Councillor Blanchett.
I move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91A(c) of the community charter to discuss matters relating to the personal information of individuals who hold a position with the district or are being considered for a committee appointment or employee relations.
Seconder?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried.